When my husband's mistress declared my house belonged to her, I felt something inside me shatter, like crystal on marble. 7 days later, I was standing in my own funeral, watching her cry crocodile tears over my empty casket. That's when I realized life is just a theater production where the understudies are always waiting for the star to fall. If you're watching this story unfold, subscribe now and tell me in the comments if you've ever wanted to witness the look on someone's face when their perfect little scheme falls apart. Trust me, what happens next is worth staying for. My name is Eleanor Blackwood. For 27 years, I was Mrs. Richard Blackwood, mistress of Blackwood Manor, mother to 3 children, and pillar of Westlake society. And for at least 15 of those years, my husband had been sleeping with Vivian Pierce. I'd known, of course. In a town like Westlake, secrets are currency, but they're rarely kept for long. The first time I heard the whispers was at the hospital charity gala. I was arranging centerpieces when I overheard Meredith Collins and Patricia Whitman behind a column. "Poor Eleanor," Patricia had whispered. "Always the last to know." "Richard isn't even trying to hide it anymore," Meredith replied, taking Vivian to that restaurant in Hartford where everyone could see them. The centerpiece I was arranging collapsed under my suddenly trembling fingers. Roses scattered across the white tablecloth like drops of blood. I gathered them quickly, my face burning with humiliation. That night, I confronted Richard in his study. "Are you having an affair with Vivian Pierce?" I asked, my voice steadier than my hands. Richard didn't even look up from his brandy. "Eleanor, don't be ridiculous. Vivian is a business associate. Business associates don't share hotel rooms in Hartford." His eyes finally met mine, cold and dismissive. I won't dignify that with a response. This conversation is over. But it wasn't over. Not for me, not for Vivian, and certainly not for Westlake society, who watched our marriage crumble with the voracious appetite of vultures circling a dying animal. For years, I endured. I hosted dinner parties where Vivian would appear as a family friend. I sat through charity board meetings where she would casually mention weekends away with dear Richard. I suffered through my children's graduations, watching her hover at the edges of family photographs. Why did I stay? The reasons were as complex as the lies we told each other. For the children, for appearances, for the empire Richard had built, which was so intertwined with my own identity that leaving would mean erasing myself entirely. And perhaps beneath it all, because of a desperate, pathetic hope that one day he would choose me again. That hope died on a rainy Tuesday in April, the day Richard clutched his chest at the breakfast table and collapsed. The heart attack was massive, the doctor said. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. In the haze of grief that followed, something unexpected happened. As I sorted through Richard's papers, I discovered the truth. Everything was in my name. The house, the businesses, the accounts, all of it. Richard had built an empire, but legally I owned it. I wondered if he'd done it out of guilt, or perhaps as a safeguard against scandal if his affair ever became too public. Whatever the reason, the knowledge gave me a strange, cold comfort. The funeral was a spectacle, as all things in Richard's life had been. Half of Westlake turned out in black, murmuring condolences they didn't mean. Vivian was there, of course, wearing a veil that did nothing to hide her theatrical tears. Afterward, at the reception in our home, my home, I overheard her in the garden, speaking to my eldest son, Richard Jr. "Your father wanted me to have the lake house," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "He promised it to me just last month." Richard Jr., always weak-willed like his father, nodded. "I'm sure we can work something out, Vivian. Mother is, well, she's not thinking clearly these days." I stood frozen behind the hedge, something dark and dangerous unfurling inside me. They were already dividing my life, my property, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone in Richard's study, a glass of his favorite brandy in my hand. On his desk was a framed photograph of our family, Richard, myself, and our 3 children, Richard Jr., Catherine, and Thomas. It had been taken years ago, before the affair, before the whispers. We looked happy. I threw the photograph against the wall, watching as the glass shattered. In that moment, staring at the broken frame, a plan began to form. What if Eleanor Blackwood simply disappeared? What would Vivian do if she thought I was gone? How quickly would she try to claim what was mine? The plan came together with surprising ease. My old college roommate, Margaret, now a doctor at Westlake Memorial, had always owed me a favor after I'd kept quiet about her affair with a married surgeon. One falsified death certificate later, and Eleanor Blackwood was officially deceased. Heart failure, the death certificate said. Like husband, like wife. The rest required careful orchestration. A private funeral service. A closed casket. Tearful goodbyes for my children, who believed their mother had succumbed to grief. And me, watching it all from a rented apartment across town, my hair dyed, glasses disguising my face. For 4 weeks, I observed as my life was dismantled. Vivian moved into my house within days. To help the children, she claimed. She wore my jewelry, used my china, and slept in my bed. My children, overwhelmed by the second tragedy in such a short time, didn't resist. I watched as Catherine allowed Vivian to help sort through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to donate. I saw Thomas accept Vivian's guidance on business decisions regarding the family company, and Richard Jr., always his father's son, welcomed her as if she had always belonged. The final insult came 1 month after my death. Vivian arranged a family dinner, my family at my table, ostensibly to discuss the future of the Blackwood estate. She invited my sister Claire, the only family member who had genuinely mourned me, and my closest friend, Judith, who had spoken so movingly at my funeral that I had almost revealed myself then and there. Through the window, I watched them gather in my dining room. Vivian sat at the head of the table, my place. She wore my favorite blue dress, altered to fit her slimmer frame, and my grandmother's pearls around her neck. The conversation flowed as they ate from my best china, drank from my crystal. Business discussions, reminiscences about Richard, occasional mentions of poor Eleanor that made my blood boil. As dessert was served, my secret recipe chocolate souffle, which she had clearly wheedled out of my housekeeper, Vivian tapped her glass for attention. She stood, radiant in her stolen finery, and raised her glass. "I want to thank you all for welcoming me into this family," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "Richard always said that one day we would all be together like this. He wanted me here, with all of you." My sister Claire looked down at her plate. Judith's hand tightened around her glass. My children watched Vivian with expressions ranging from acceptance to uncomfortable resignation. "Richard and I had plans," Vivian continued. "Plans that included all of you, this house, this family. And though he's gone now, and Eleanor too," here she paused for effect, dabbing at dry eyes, "I intend to honor those plans." She lifted her glass higher, looking around the table with a triumphant smile. "To new beginnings. This is my house now." That was when I opened the dining room door and stepped inside. The silence was absolute. 7 faces turned toward me in varying states of shock. My children froze, forks suspended in midair. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Judith knocked over her water glass. And Vivian... Oh, Vivian's face was everything I had dreamed of during my month of exile. The color drained from her cheeks. The wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, red liquid splashing across my grandmother's Persian rug like blood. "Hello, Vivian," I said calmly. "I believe you're sitting in my chair." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor in a dead faint. The chaos that followed was almost comical. My children, shocked back to life, leaped from their chairs. Catherine screamed. Thomas ran to my side, touching my face, as if to confirm I was real. Richard Jr. stood frozen, his expression shifting between disbelief and horror. Claire was the first to recover her wits. "Eleanor," she whispered, "how is this possible?" "I'm not dead," I said simply. "I never was." "But the funeral, we buried you," Thomas said, his voice breaking. "You buried an empty casket," I replied. And now I've returned to reclaim what's mine. On the floor, Vivian stirred, moaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, fixing on me with naked terror. "You're dead," she whispered. "Disappointing, isn't it?" I smiled down at her. "Now get out of my house." She scrambled to her feet, backing away from me as if I were a ghost. "This isn't possible. The death certificate was falsified." I finished for her. "Just like your grief. Just like your relationship with my family." "Mother," Richard Jr. finally found his voice. "What have you done? Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" I turned to my eldest son, the one who had so easily accepted Vivian in my place. "What I've put you through." My voice was ice. "While you were letting this woman move into my house, wear my clothes, and take my place at this table. While you were discussing giving her the lake house that has been in my family for generations." He had the grace to look ashamed. "All of you." I looked around at my children, sat here tonight, and listened to her claim my home, my life, without a single word of protest. "So don't speak to me about what I've put you through." "Eleanor." Judith stepped forward, reaching for my hand. "We thought you were dead. We mourned you." "Some more convincingly than others," I replied, but I squeezed her hand. Judith, at least, had been a true friend. Vivian had recovered enough to attempt defiance. "Richard wanted me here. He promised me." "Richard is dead." I cut her off. "And whatever he promised you died with him. The house, the business, everything, it's all in my name. Always has been." Her face contorted with rage. "You're lying." "Am I?" I walked to Richard's desk in the corner of the dining room and removed a folder. "These are the property deeds, the business holdings, the bank accounts. Every last one in the name of Eleanor Blackwood. You have no claim here, Vivian. You never did." "We had a verbal agreement," she insisted desperately. "Richard promised." "Promises aren't legally binding," I said coolly. "But do feel free to challenge me in court. I'm sure the judge will be fascinated to hear how you moved into a dead woman's house and began distributing her property before the body was cold." Richard Jr. stepped forward. "Mother, please. This is a shock for all of us. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, as a family." "We're discussing it as a family," I replied. "And Vivian is not family." "Eleanor," Claire said softly. "How did you do this? Why?" I looked at my sister, the only one who had truly grieved for me, because I needed to know what would happen when I was gone. "Now I know." I turned back to Vivian. "You have 30 minutes to collect your things and leave my house. Anything of mine that you've taken will stay here." "You can't do this," she hissed. "You can't just come back from the dead and expect everything to go back to normal." "I don't expect normal," I said. "I expect respect. I expect what's rightfully mine. And I expect you gone in 30 minutes, or I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing." For a moment, I thought she might attack me. Her hands curled into claws, her face twisted with fury. Then, abruptly, she straightened, composing herself with visible effort. "This isn't over, Eleanor," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You have no idea what you've started." "No, Vivian," I replied. "This is exactly what I finished." She stormed out of the dining room, heading for the stairs. I turned to my housekeeper, Mrs. Fletcher, who had been standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold with undisguised satisfaction. "Mrs. Fletcher, please accompany Miss Pierce while she collects her belongings. Make sure she takes only what is hers." "With pleasure, Mrs. Blackwood," Mrs. Fletcher replied, following Vivian upstairs. In the silence that followed, I faced my family. The shock on their faces had given way to a complex mix of emotions: relief, confusion, anger, guilt. "Mother," Catherine was the first to speak, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand. Why would you do this to us?" "I didn't do this to you," I replied. "I did it for me. For 30 years, I've lived for this family. I've sacrificed, compromised, and endured humiliation. I stayed with your father despite knowing about Vivian for 15 years. And when he died, I watched as you all began to erase me, to let her take my place." "That's not fair," Thomas protested. "We thought you were dead." And how quickly you all moved on, I said. How easily you accepted her in my place. What were we supposed to do? Richard Jr. demanded. She said Dad wanted her here. We were grieving both of you. You were supposed to honor my memory, I said quietly. Instead, you let her wear my clothes, sleep in my bed, and claim my home. The guilt on their faces told me my words had hit home. Claire approached me slowly, taking my hands in hers. Eleanor, what you did was cruel. We buried you. We mourned you. Do you have any idea what that did to us? I looked into my sister's eyes, seeing the genuine pain there. I'm sorry for hurting you, Claire. You and Judith were the only ones who truly grieved for me, but I needed to know the truth. And now that you know it? Judith asked softly. What happens next? Before I could answer, Mrs. Fletcher reappeared at the doorway. Mrs. Blackwood, Miss Pierce is collecting her things, but she's asking about some jewelry she claims Mr. Blackwood gave her. If it's my jewelry, it stays, I said firmly. If she can prove he purchased it specifically for her, she can take it. Mrs. Fletcher nodded and disappeared again. Mother, Catherine said, wiping her tears. I don't know how to feel right now. I'm happy you're alive, but I feel like I don't even know you anymore. Perhaps you never did, I replied. Perhaps none of you did. But that's going to change. What do you mean? Thomas asked warily. I mean that things will be different now, I said. I won't be the silent, suffering wife anymore. I won't be the mother who looks the other way. From now on, we live by my rules. Richard Jr. bristled. Dad left me in charge of the business. You can't just. Your father left you nothing. I cut him off. Everything is in my name, remember? The businesses, the properties, the accounts. I allowed you to believe you were in charge because that's what your father wanted. But legally, it's all mine. The blood drained from his face. You wouldn't I? I raised an eyebrow. You are quite ready to give Vivian the lake house that has been in my family for generations. Perhaps I should reconsider how much I trust your judgment. A tense silence fell over the room. My children exchanged glances, realizing for the first time that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The sound of heels on the staircase announced Vivian's return. She entered the dining room, chin held high, a suitcase in each hand. Mrs. Fletcher followed, carrying a smaller bag. I've taken what's mine, Vivian said coldly. The rest I leave to you, along with these ungrateful children. Vivian. Richard Jr. stepped forward, but she silenced him with a look. Don't, she snapped. You all sat there and let her throw me out without a word in my defense. After everything I've done for this family. What exactly have you done for this family? I asked pleasantly. Besides sleeping with my husband and trying to steal my life? Her eyes narrowed. You have no idea what Richard and I had. You were just a convenience to him, a respectable front for the business. I was the one he loved. And yet he left everything to me. I smiled. Curious, isn't it? She flinched as if I'd slapped her. This isn't over, Eleanor. You may think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. Goodbye, Vivian, I said calmly. Mrs. Fletcher will show you out. With a final venomous glare, she followed Mrs. Fletcher to the front door. We heard it slam a moment later, the sound reverberating through the silent house. Well, I said, turning back to my stunned family. Shall we have coffee in the drawing room? We have a lot to discuss. In the drawing room, I poured coffee from the silver service while my family settled onto the sofas, still looking shell-shocked. Claire sat beside me, occasionally touching my arm as if to reassure herself I was real. Judith took the armchair opposite, her expression a mix of relief and wariness. I suppose you all have questions, I said, passing cups around.
How?
Thomas asked simply. How did you fake your own death? I explained about Margaret, the falsified death certificate, the private funeral with a closed casket. I told them about the apartment across town, the disguise, the careful observations of my own home. But why? Catherine asked, her voice breaking. Why put us through that? I set down my cup carefully. Because I needed to know what would happen when I was gone. I needed to see who would protect my legacy and who would help dismantle it. That's not fair, Richard Jr. protested. We were grieving. We weren't thinking clearly. And yet Vivian moved in within days, I replied. And none of you objected. None of you protected what was mine, what should have been yours to inherit someday. We thought that's what Dad would have wanted, Thomas said quietly. Your father is dead, I said flatly. What he would have wanted no longer matters. What matters is what I want, and what I want is for this family to remember who we are. And who are we, Mother? Catherine asked, a hint of bitterness in her voice. We are Blackwoods, I said firmly. We don't give away what's ours. We don't betray each other. And we certainly don't let outsiders take what belongs to us. Is that why you're threatening to take the business from me? Richard Jr. asked, his jaw tight. I'm not threatening anything, I replied. I'm simply reminding you of the reality. The business is legally mine. I've allowed you to run it because I thought you were capable. If I've misjudged, I can always reconsider. This is blackmail, he said, standing abruptly. This is family, I corrected him. And in this family, loyalty matters. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Catherine looked torn, then followed her brother. Thomas remained, studying me with new eyes. You've changed, Mother. No, I shook my head. I've simply stopped pretending. After my children had gone, Richard Jr. and Catherine in angry silence, Thomas with a hesitant kiss on my cheek. Only Claire and Judith remained. The three of us sat in the drawing room, the tension gradually easing. You realize you've declared war, Claire said softly. Vivian won't let this go. Let her try, I shrugged. She has no legal standing, no claim to anything. It's not about legal standing, Judith warned. It's about revenge. You humiliated her in front of the family. She'll want to hurt you back. I'm counting on it. I smiled thinly. Let her show her true colors. Claire exchanged a concerned glance with Judith. Eleanor, what aren't you telling us? I sipped my coffee, considering how much to reveal. Vivian isn't just Richard's mistress. She's much more dangerous than that. What do you mean? Judith leaned forward. During my month away, I did more than observe, I explained. I investigated. Richard's heart attack wasn't as sudden as it appeared. He'd been having chest pains for weeks, but his doctor had prescribed medication. Medication that went missing the day before he died. Claire gasped. You think, Vivian? I think she saw an opportunity, I said carefully. Richard was changing his will. He'd finally agreed to divorce me and marry her. But the paperwork wasn't finished. If he died married to me, everything stayed with me. Eleanor, Judith's voice was hushed. Are you suggesting Vivian murdered your husband? I'm suggesting it's a possibility worth investigating, I replied. And now that I've returned from the dead, she knows I'm a threat. You need to go to the police, Claire insisted. With what evidence? I shook my head. A missing prescription bottle? Suspicious timing? It's not enough. Then what are you going to do? Judith asked. I smiled, setting down my coffee cup with a decisive click. I'm going to let Vivian think she still has a chance at what she wants. I'm going to give her enough rope to hang herself. And when she makes her move, and she will, I'll be ready. Claire took my hand, her expression troubled. Be careful, Eleanor. You're playing a dangerous game. I've been playing dangerous games my entire marriage, I replied. The difference is, now I'm playing to win. Later that night, after Claire and Judith had gone, I walked through my reclaimed home, running my fingers over familiar surfaces, reacquainting myself with the space that had been mine for nearly 3 decades. In the master bedroom, I found evidence of Vivian's occupation, a lingering scent of her perfume, a few overlooked hairpins on the vanity. I stripped the bed immediately, calling for Mrs. Fletcher to bring fresh linens. I would not sleep where she had slept with my husband. As Mrs. Fletcher helped me remake the bed, she spoke for the first time about the past month. She was horrible, Mrs. Blackwood, she confided. Ordering everyone about, throwing away your things, treating the staff like dirt. Mr. Richard Jr. tried to stop her at first, But she would cry and carry on about how much Mr. Blackwood had wanted her to feel at home. "And my other children?" I asked. "Thomas? Catherine?" "Miss Catherine avoided the house as much as possible," Mrs. Fletcher said. "Mr. Thomas confronted Ms. Pierce once, when she tried to move your portrait from the hallway. That led to quite a row." I felt a small surge of gratitude toward my youngest son. At least one of my children had tried to preserve my memory. "Thank you for staying, Mrs. Fletcher," I said. "It couldn't have been easy." "This is my home too, Mrs. Blackwood," she replied simply. I wasn't about to let that woman drive me away. After she left, I sat at my vanity, removing the dark hair dye that had been part of my disguise. As the water in the basin turned black, I studied my reflection. The woman looking back at me seemed different. Harder, colder, more determined. For decades, I had been the perfect wife, the gracious hostess, the understanding mother. I had turned a blind eye to Richard's infidelities, swallowed my pride when society whispered behind my back, maintained the facade of the happy family. That woman was gone. She had died with Richard, been buried in that empty casket. The woman who had returned was someone else entirely, someone who would no longer suffer in silence, who would fight for what was hers, who would extract a price for every humiliation endured. As I prepared for bed, I noticed something on the nightstand that Mrs. Fletcher had missed during the cleanup, a small notepad with Vivian's handwriting. Most pages had been torn out, but the impression of her pen had left ghostly traces on the next page. I held it up to the light, tilting it until I could make out the words. "Meeting with J.S. Thursday, 2 p.m. Discuss final arrangements. J.S. James Sullivan, Richard's lawyer. The man who had handled all our legal affairs for 20 years. The man who knew every detail of Richard's will, every aspect of our financial arrangements. What final arrangements was Vivian discussing with him? And why now, after I had returned?" I placed the notepad in my desk drawer. Tomorrow, I would pay Mr. Sullivan a visit. Something told me Vivian's claim that this isn't over was more than just an empty threat. As I slipped between the fresh sheets, exhaustion finally overtaking me, my mind drifted to the look on Vivian's face when I had appeared in the dining room doorway. The shock, the disbelief, the fear. For 15 years, I had been the one afraid of scandal, afraid of loneliness, afraid of change. Now it was her turn. Let her be afraid, I thought as sleep claimed me. Let her wonder what else I know. Let her worry about what I'll do next. Because this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke early, my body still accustomed to the vigilant schedule I'd maintained during my self-imposed exile. The house was quiet, the staff not yet stirring. I dressed carefully, choosing a black suit that I hadn't worn before my death. Something Vivian wouldn't have seen, something that declared my return to the land of the living. In Richard's study, my study now, I reviewed the documents I'd gathered during my month away. Bank statements showing unusual transfers in the weeks before Richard's death. Medical records I'd convinced Margaret to access, detailing Richard's heart condition and prescriptions. Notes on Vivian's movements, her meetings, her phone calls. I had not been idle during my disappearance. While Vivian played Lady of the Manor, I had been building a case, not just to reclaim my home, but to understand what had really happened to my husband. At 8 o'clock precisely, I called James Sullivan's office. "Mrs. Blackwood?" His secretary sounded as if she'd heard a ghost. "But you're very much alive." I finished for her. "And in need of an appointment with Mr. Sullivan today." "It's urgent." Yes, of course," she stammered. "Mr. Sullivan has a cancellation at 10. "I'll be there," I said, and hung up. At 9:30, I left the house, ignoring the startled glances of neighbors who had attended my funeral just weeks earlier. Let them stare. Let them wonder. Their whispers had once been my greatest fear. Now they were merely background noise. Sullivan's office was in a converted Victorian on the edge of the business district. As I entered the reception area, his secretary's eyes widened, her hand flying to her throat. "Mrs. Blackwood," she whispered. "It's really you." "Yes, Miss Parker." I smiled thinly. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. "Is James in?" Without waiting for an answer, I walked past her desk and opened the door to Sullivan's office. He was at his desk, had bent over some paperwork. At the sound of the door, he looked up, and the color drained from his face. "Eleanor," he breathed, rising slowly from his chair. "Hello, James." I closed the door behind me. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." He sank back into his chair, staring at me as if I were an apparition. "How is this possible? The death certificate, the funeral, all part of a necessary deception," I said, taking a seat opposite him. One that revealed some interesting truths. "I don't understand," he shook his head. "Let me clarify then." I leaned forward. "I know about your meeting with Vivian Pierce tomorrow. I want to know what final arrangements you plan to discuss." His face, already pale, went completely white. "How did you?" "That's not important." I cut him off. "What matters is what you're going to tell me right now. How long have you been working with her behind my back, James? Before Richard died? Before I supposedly died? Or only after, when you thought there was no one left to protect the family interests?" "Eleanor, please." He raised his hands placatingly. "It's not what you think. Richard left certain instructions." "Richard left everything to me," I said coldly. "Every property, every account, every share in the business. You drew up those documents yourself." "Yes, but there were verbal agreements, promises he made to Vivian." "Promises aren't legally binding," I reminded him. "As you well know." He shifted uncomfortably. "She is evidence of his intentions. Letters, recordings of conversations where he promised to provide for her." "Provide for her?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or give her everything that was mine?" Sullivan didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Let me be very clear, James," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "If you are planning to help Vivian Pierce claim any part of my estate, you should reconsider. Because I will fight you with everything I have, and I will win." "Eleanor, be reasonable," he tried again. "Richard wanted." "Richard is dead." I cut him off again. "And whatever he wanted died with him. I am very much alive, and I want you to cancel your meeting with Vivian." He hesitated, and I could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing loyalty against self-interest, old alliances against new realities. "If you meet with her," I continued, "I will take it as confirmation that you no longer represent the Blackwood family interests. I will find new legal representation, and I will make it my mission to ensure that everyone in Westlake knows exactly why." The threat hung in the air between us. In a town like Westlake, reputation was everything. If the Blackwoods, one of the oldest and wealthiest families, publicly fired their lawyer of 20 years, questions would be asked. Rumors would spread. Business would suffer. "What do you want from me, Eleanor?" he asked finally. "I want your loyalty," I replied. "I want you to tell me everything you know about Richard's plans regarding Vivian. I want you to show me any documents, any evidence of these verbal agreements she claims existed. Attorney-client privilege does not apply to co-conspirators and fraud," I finished. "Which is what you'll be if you help Vivian claim what legally belongs to me." For a long moment, he said nothing, his lawyer's mind no doubt searching for loopholes, escape clauses. Finally, he sighed and opened a drawer in his desk. "Richard came to see me 2 weeks before he died," he said, removing a file. "He wanted to change his will. He said he was planning to divorce you and marry Vivian. He wanted to ensure she would be provided for." He slid the file across the desk to me. Inside was a draft of a new will, and signed unwitnessed, merely a proposal. But the contents made my blood run cold. In this version, Richard left the house to Vivian, along with a controlling interest in the family business. My children received token inheritances. I was to get a modest allowance and the lake house, the very property Vivian had been asking about. "He died before it could be executed," Sullivan explained. "So the previous will, everything to you, remained in effect." I closed the file, my hands steady despite the shock. "Does Vivian know about this draft?" "Yes," he admitted. "Richard showed it to her. That's why she believes she has a claim. That's what she wants to discuss tomorrow, filing a challenge to the current will based on this draft and Richard's clear intentions." "A challenge that would fail," I said. "This is signed unwitnessed. It has no legal standing." "In normal circumstances, yes," he agreed. But given your unusual situation, faking your own death, disappearing for a month, she believes a court might be sympathetic to her claim. I considered this. It was a desperate strategy, with little chance of success. But it revealed how far Vivian was willing to go, how determined she was to take what was mine. "Cancel the meeting, James," I said, standing. "And if Vivian contacts you again, tell her you can no longer represent her interests as they conflict with your primary client, me." He hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish, Eleanor." I turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. Richard's heart medication. The prescription that went missing just before he died. Did he ever mention it to you? A flicker of surprise crossed Sullivan's face. "How did you know about that?" "I make it my business to know things now," I replied. "Did he mention it?" "He called me the day before he died," Sullivan said slowly. "He was upset, said someone had taken his medication. He thought you might have done it." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "Me? Why would I?" "He said you'd found out about his plans to change the will," Sullivan explained. "He was paranoid, convinced you were trying to delay the divorce. Without his medication, he couldn't risk the stress of a confrontation with you." I absorbed this information, adding it to the complex puzzle I was assembling. "Did he say how I found out about the will?" Sullivan shook his head. "Just that you knew, and that you were dangerous when cornered." I smiled coldly. He was right about that, at least. "Thank you for your honesty, James. I'll expect your full cooperation moving forward." As I left the office, my mind was racing. Richard had suspected me of taking his medication, of effectively contributing to his death. Was that why the new will was so punitive? A punishment for a crime I hadn't committed? And if I hadn't taken the medication, who had? The obvious answer was Vivian. But why would she sabotage the very process that would have given her everything she wanted? Unless she knew something I didn't. Unless there was more to Richard's plans than a simple divorce and remarriage. I needed to dig deeper. Back at home, I found Catherine waiting for me in the drawing room. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Mother," she said, standing awkwardly. I owe you an apology." I set down my purse, studying my middle child. Always the peacemaker, always trying to smooth over family conflicts. "Do you?" I asked neutrally. "Yes." She twisted her hands together. "I should have stood up to Vivian. I should have protected your home, your things. I was just so confused, so overwhelmed by losing both you and Dad, so close together." I sat down, gesturing for her to join me on the sofa. "Why did you let her move in, Catherine? That's what I still don't understand." Catherine looked down, ashamed. "Richard said it would be easier. He said Vivian knew how to run the house, how to manage the staff. And she was so insistent. She had Dad's keys, his phone. She knew passwords to accounts, details about the business. It was like she'd been his partner all along, and we just hadn't known." "She was his partner," I said quietly. "Just not in the way you think." Catherine looked up, confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I debated how much to tell her. Catherine had always been sensitive, easily upset. But she was also perceptive, observant. She might know things, have seen things that could help me understand what had really happened. "Your father was planning to divorce me," I said finally. "He was changing his will to leave the house to Vivian, along with control of the business." Catherine's eyes widened. "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't do that to you. To us." "I've seen the draft," I said. "It was never executed because he died before it could be signed. But the intention was clear." "That doesn't make sense." Catherine shook her head. "Dad always said the business would go to Richard Jr., that the house would stay in the family." "People change," I said bitterly. "Or perhaps he was never who we thought he was." Catherine was silent for a long moment, digesting this. "Is that why you faked your death? Because you found out about the will?" "No," I said. "I didn't know about the will until today. I faked my death because I needed to see what would happen when I was gone. I needed to know who would protect my interests and who would betray them." "And we all failed your test," Catherine said, her voice small. I softened slightly. Not all. Thomas tried to stop Vivian from removing my portrait. Mrs. Fletcher stayed loyal. Claire and Judith truly mourned me. I mourned you too, Catherine insisted. We all did. But Vivian was like a force of nature. She just took over. And we were all too numb, too shocked to resist. That's what people like Vivian count on, I said. They move quickly, decisively, while others are still reeling from shock. By the time you realize what's happening, they've already established control. Catherine nodded slowly. What happens now?
Now.
I smiled grimly. Now I take back what's mine. All of it. And I find out what really happened to your father. What do you mean? She frowned. Dad had a heart attack. Did he? I raised an eyebrow. Or was he helped along? Catherine gasped. Mother, you can't be suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything yet, I said. I'm investigating. And I could use your help. My help?
How?
You were close to your father, I said. He confided in you. Did he ever mention problems with his heart medication? Or concerns about Vivian? Catherine hesitated, and I could see her wrestling with some memory. The night before he died, she said finally, I came by to drop off some books he'd asked to borrow. He was in his study, arguing with someone on the phone. He was agitated, saying something about missing medication and dangerous games. When he saw me, he hung up quickly. Did he say who he was talking to? She shook her head. But afterward, he asked me a strange question. He asked if I thought Vivian truly loved him or if she was just using him. I leaned forward. What did you say? I told him I didn't know her well enough to judge, Catherine replied, but that anyone who loved him would want him to be honest with his family. He got very quiet after that. This was new information, a crack in the facade of Richard and Vivian's supposedly perfect relationship. A seed of doubt planted the very night before his death. Did he say anything else? I pressed. Just that he was tired of secrets, Catherine said. That he was going to make things right. I assumed he meant he was going to end things with Vivian. Maybe try to reconcile with you. I absorbed this, adding it to the complex tapestry I was weaving. Richard, planning to divorce me one moment, expressing doubts about Vivian the next. A missing prescription. A death that came at the perfect moment for someone. But who? Thank you for telling me this, Catherine, I said. It helps.
She reached for my hand.
I am sorry, Mother.
For everything.
For not being stronger when you needed me to be. I squeezed her hand, feeling a sudden rush of maternal tenderness that I'd suppressed during my month of cold observation. We'll make it right together. After Catherine left, promising to call her brothers for a family meeting that evening, I returned to Richard's study. Opening his computer, the password was still our anniversary date. Despite everything, I began searching through his emails, his calendar, his files. Most were business-related, bland and unrevealing. But in a folder labeled Personal, I found something interesting. A series of emails between Richard and a private investigator named Michael Dawson. The most recent was dated 3 days before Richard's death. Report attached as requested. It read, findings consistent with previous suspicions. Recommend caution moving forward. Available to discuss next steps at your convenience. The attachment was password protected. I tried several combinations, Richard's birthday, our anniversary, Vivian's name, before finally succeeding with Blackwood 1956, the year his father had founded the family business. The report opened, and as I read, a chill spread through me. It wasn't about me, as I had half expected. It was about Vivian. Bank records showing large transfers to offshore accounts. A history of name changes. Vivian Pierce was her third identity in 10 years. And most damning of all, connections to 2 previous wealthy men who had died suddenly, leaving their fortunes to their new young wives. Wives who had disappeared shortly after collecting their inheritances, never to be seen again. My hands were shaking as I reached the final page of the report, where the investigator had added a personal note. Richard, as discussed, I've forwarded this information to my contact at the FBI. They're particularly interested in the Hobson case, as they've been investigating his death for potential poisoning. If Vivian Pierce is who I think she is, she's not just a gold digger. She's something far more dangerous. Be careful. MD. I sat back, my mind reeling. Vivian wasn't just Richard's mistress, the other woman, the would-be usurper of my position. She was potentially a serial Black Widow, a woman who seduced wealthy men, arranged for their deaths, and disappeared with their fortunes. And Richard had discovered her secret just days before his own sudden death. The pieces were falling into place now. Richard, realizing what Vivian was, had likely confronted her. She, seeing her scheme unraveling, had taken decisive action, removing his heart medication, ensuring a fatal cardiac event. But she hadn't counted on one thing: the will had not been changed. Everything still belonged to me. That explained her desperate rush to establish herself in the house, to ingratiate herself with my children, to create the impression that Richard had wanted her there. She was improvising, trying to salvage her plan after a critical failure. And now, with my return, that plan was in shambles. I printed the report, adding it to my growing file of evidence. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed for Michael Dawson, the private investigator. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. Dawson Investigations. Mr. Dawson, I said. My name is Eleanor Blackwood, Richard Blackwood's wife. A pause. Mrs. Blackwood, I heard you passed away recently. My condolences. Reports of my death were exaggerated, I said dryly. I've just read your report on Vivian Pierce. We need to talk. Another pause, longer this time. This line isn't secure. Where can we meet? The lake house, I decided. 2 hours from now. Do you have the address? I can find it, he said.
Come alone.
And Mrs. Blackwood? Watch your back. The line went dead. I sat for a moment, absorbing the implications of his warning. If Vivian was as dangerous as the report suggested, I had just placed myself directly in her crosshairs by returning from the dead and challenging her claim. But I also had something she didn't know about. Evidence of her true identity, her past crimes. Information that could send her to prison for life. It was time to turn the tables. For years, I had been the one afraid, the one at risk of losing everything. Now it was Vivian's turn to feel that fear. I called Mrs. Fletcher and asked her to pack an overnight bag. Then I left a note for my children, explaining that I would be at the lake house and would return for our family meeting the following day. As I drove through the gates of Blackwood Manor, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the house that had been my home for nearly 3 decades. The house that had witnessed my humiliations, my compromises, my silent suffering. The house that Vivian had tried to claim as her own. This is my house now, she had declared so confidently, raising her glass in triumph. How quickly triumph had turned to terror. How satisfying it had been to watch her face as she realized her carefully laid plans were crumbling. But the game wasn't over. It had merely entered a new, more dangerous phase. And this time, I intended to be the one left standing when the dust settled. As I turned onto the highway leading out of Westlake, a dark sedan pulled out behind me, maintaining a discreet distance. Was it Dawson, following to ensure I arrived safely? Or someone else, someone who had a vested interest in ensuring I didn't reach my destination? I pressed harder on the accelerator, the house and town receding behind me, the road ahead unspooling like the next chapter of a story I was only beginning to understand. The truth about Richard's death. The truth about Vivian's past. The truth about my own family's loyalties. All would be revealed soon enough. And then, the real reckoning would begin. The dark sedan stayed 3 car lengths behind me all the way to the lake house, never closing the gap, never falling too far behind. Someone was definitely following me. I took a sudden turn onto a narrow side road, an old shortcut to the lake that few people knew about, and watched in my rearview mirror as the sedan continued straight ahead. Either they didn't know I was onto them, or they were playing a longer game. If you're still watching my story unfold, hit subscribe right now, because what I discovered at the lake house changed everything I thought I knew about my husband, my family, and the woman who tried to steal my life. The lake house had been in my family for generations. Nestled among ancient pines on the shores of Lake Westlake, it was smaller and more rustic than Blackwood Manor, but infinitely more precious to me. This was where I had spent summers as a child, where I had first met Richard at a lakeside party, where we had brought our own children every summer for decades. As I pulled up the gravel driveway, I noticed another car already parked near the house, a nondescript gray SUV with tinted windows. Michael Dawson had arrived before me. I found him on the deck overlooking the lake, a weathered man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't seem surprised to see me alive. "Mrs. Blackwood," he nodded. "Quite the resurrection." "Mr. Dawson," I replied. "Thank you for meeting me." "Not sure I had much choice," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. "Not every day a dead woman calls asking about a potential Black Widow." I sat down, placing the folder with his report on the table between us. "Tell me everything you know about Vivian Pierce." He studied me for a moment, as if gauging how much I could handle. "Your husband hired me 3 months ago. Said he had concerns about his companion's background. The more I dug, the worse it got. The report mentions 2 other men," I prompted. "Harold Jenkins and William Hobson," Dawson nodded. "Both wealthy, both older than her. Both died suddenly after changing their wills in her favor. Jenkins was a heart attack, like your husband. Hobson was initially ruled natural causes, but the FBI reopened the investigation last year. They suspect poison. And in both cases, she disappeared after collecting her inheritance. With new identities, yes. Before she was Vivian Pierce, she was Rebecca Winters. Before that, Carolyn Lake. I suspect there were others, but those are the ones I could confirm." I absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the calculating killer in Dawson's report with the woman who had sat at my table, worn my clothes, charmed my children. "Did Richard confront her with what you found?" I asked. Dawson's expression darkened. "He called me the night before he died. Said he'd spoken to her, that she denied everything but seemed rattled. He mentioned his heart medication had gone missing, asked if I thought it was connected." "And did you?" "I told him to get to a hospital immediately," Dawson said grimly. "Told him to call the police. He said he needed proof first, that he couldn't accuse her without evidence." "Always the lawyer," I murmured, thinking of Richard's methodical mind, his need for irrefutable facts before taking action. "By morning, he was dead," Dawson continued. "When I heard you had died too, a month later, I started looking into Vivian again. Figured she might be accelerating her timeline." "Did you find anything new?" He nodded, reaching into his jacket and removing a small flash drive. "Bank records showing large withdrawals in the days after your husband's death. Travel arrangements to Sao Paulo under the name Diana Reynolds. And this." He handed me his phone, showing a photo of Vivian meeting with a man I didn't recognize in what looked like a hotel lobby. "Who is he?" I asked.
Martín Graves, Dawson Diplaid.
Expert in identity creation, specializing in high-end documentation for people looking to disappear. Your husband's mistress was planning her exit strategy. But she stayed. I mused. She moved into my house instead. Because the will wasn't changed, Dawson explained. She couldn't access the money directly. She needed your children's cooperation, needed to establish herself as the rightful inheritor of Richard's estate. "And then I died," I said softly. "Or so everyone thought. The perfect opportunity for her to cement her position." "Exactly." Dawson leaned forward. "Mrs. Blackwood, the FBI is building a case against her, but it's circumstantial. They need hard evidence linking her to your husband's death." "What kind of evidence?" "The missing medication, for starters. Proof she took it or tampered with it. Communications showing intent. Financial records showing she knew about the FBI investigation." I thought of the notepad I'd found, the impressions of her meeting with Sullivan. The draft will that would have given her everything. "I have some of that," I said. "And I think I know where to find more." Dawson's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. If she realizes what you're doing." "She already knows I'm a threat," I replied. "She just doesn't know how much of a threat." "What's your plan?" I considered the question carefully. My first instinct was to go directly to the police with what I knew, but the lawyer in me, the part that had absorbed Richard's methodical approach over decades of marriage, knew that wasn't enough. We needed irrefutable evidence, not just suspicion. "I'm going to give Vivian exactly what she wants," I said finally. Or at least let her think I am. Which is a chance at the Blackwood fortune. I smiled thinly. I'm going to offer her a settlement, a significant sum to walk away quietly. Enough to tempt her, to make her believe she's won something. And why would you do that? Dawson asked skeptically. Because desperate people make mistakes, I replied. If she thinks she's getting what she wants, she'll let her guard down. And I need her guard down if I'm going to find concrete evidence. Dawson nodded slowly. It could work, but you'd be putting yourself at risk. I've been at risk since the moment Richard met her, I said. The difference is, now I know it. We spent the next hour outlining our strategy. Dawson would continue his investigation, focusing on Vivian's communications and movements in the days surrounding Richard's death. I would return to Blackwood Manor, arrange a meeting with Vivian, and present the settlement offer. Keep these safe, Dawson said, handing me the flash drive and a business card with his direct number. And Mrs. Blackwood? Don't underestimate her. She survived this long because she's smart and ruthless. So am I replied, thinking of the month I'd spent watching from the shadows, planning my return. She just doesn't know it yet. As Dawson left, I wandered through the lake house, memories rising unbidden in every room. Richard and I dancing on this very deck under the stars. Our children learning to swim in the clear waters. Family dinners around the old pine table, laughter echoing off the rafters. Had any of it been real? Had Richard ever truly loved me? Or had I been merely a convenient fixture in his life, the respectable wife who maintained his social standing while he pursued his true desires elsewhere? And what of my children? Had I raised them to be so easily swayed, so quick to accept an interloper in their mother's place? The questions circled like hawks, but I pushed them aside. There would be time for reckoning later. For now, I needed to focus on the immediate threat, Vivian Pierce, or whatever her real name was. I was about to call Claire to let her know I'd arrived safely when headlights swept across the windows. A car was coming up the driveway, not Dawson returning. The engine sound was different. Moving to the window, I peered through the curtains. A sleek black car had pulled up beside mine, and a familiar figure was stepping out. Richard Jr. My pulse quickened. I hadn't told anyone except Mrs. Fletcher where I was going. How had my son found me? And more importantly, why had he followed me here? I opened the door before he could knock, startling him. "Mother," he said, recovering quickly. "We need to talk." "How did you know I was here?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "Mrs. Fletcher mentioned it," he replied. "May I come in? It's cold out here." I stepped aside, watching him carefully as he entered. Richard Jr. had always been his father's son, ambitious, calculating, sometimes ruthless in pursuit of his goals. Of all my children, he had been the quickest to accommodate Vivian, the most willing to accept her in my place. "What's so urgent that it couldn't wait until tomorrow?" I asked, leading him into the living room. He took a seat on the sofa, his posture tense. "I spoke to James Sullivan today." Of course. Sullivan had wasted no time reporting our conversation to my son. "Did you?" I kept my voice neutral. "What did he have to say?" "He told me you threatened to remove me from the company," Richard Jr. said, anger simmering beneath his controlled tone. "That you claimed everything is legally yours." "I didn't claim it, Richard. It is legally mine. Your father left everything to me." "That was never his intention," my son argued. "Dad always said the business would pass to me. He was going to change his will." "Yet he didn't," I replied. "And now we'll never know if he would have." Richard Jr. leaned forward. "Mother, be reasonable. I've been running the company for years. The board respects me. The employees trust me. You can't just walk in and take over." "I have no intention of taking over day-to-day operations," I assured him. "But I will be taking a more active role in major decisions. It is my company, after all." "Ours," he corrected. "It's the family business." A family that was remarkably quick to replace me with Vivian Pierce. I couldn't resist adding. He had the grace to look ashamed, but only briefly. That was a mistake. We all see that now. But this is about the future, not the past. Is it? I studied my son's face, so like his father's, the same strong jawline, the same calculating eyes. Tell me, Richard, how well do you know Vivian? He frowned at the apparent change of subject. Well enough. She made Dad happy. Did she? I walked to the window, looking out at the dark lake. Did you know she's been involved with at least 2 other wealthy men, both of whom died suddenly after changing their wills in her favor?
What?
His surprise seemed genuine. You can't be serious. I have proof, I said, turning back to face him. Your father hired a private investigator. He discovered Vivian's true identity, or rather, identities. She's changed her name at least twice, disappeared with fortunes, reinvented herself. Richard Jr. shook his head in disbelief. If Dad knew this, why didn't he end things with her? He was going to, I said. The night before he died, he confronted her. The next morning, his heart medication was missing and he was dead. My son's face paled. You think he couldn't finish the sentence. I think it's a remarkable coincidence, I said carefully. One that the FBI is currently investigating. The FBI? Richard Jr. stood abruptly. Mother, these are serious accusations. If you're wrong. I'm not wrong. I cut him off. Your father was investigating her. He found evidence. And then he died, conveniently before he could expose her. Just like her previous husbands. I watched the implications sink in, saw the moment when doubt crept into my son's eyes. She seemed so genuine, he said softly. The way she talked about Dad, the memories they shared. She's had practice, I replied. Years of perfecting her performance. Richard Jr. paced the room, absorbing this new information. What are you going to do? I'm going to trap her, I said simply. I'm going to offer her money to walk away, enough to tempt her. And while she's considering it, I'm going to find the evidence that links her directly to your father's death. He stopped pacing, turning to face me. That's dangerous, Mother. If she's what you say she is, if she killed Dad, she won't hesitate to hurt you too. I'm counting on her to try. I smiled coldly. Because when she does, we'll have the proof we need. My son stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. You've changed. No. I shook my head. I've simply stopped pretending. For a long moment, he said nothing, weighing his options, recalculating his position now that the landscape had shifted so dramatically. What do you need from me? He asked finally. Your support, I replied. Your silence about what I've told you. And your help in gathering evidence, if it comes to that. He nodded slowly. You have it. But Mother, be careful. Don't underestimate her. That seems to be the advice of the day, I said dryly. Now, is there anything else? I've had a long day. Just one thing, he hesitated. Thomas found something in Dad's study this afternoon. A key to a safe deposit box none of us knew about. We were going to open it tomorrow. A safe deposit box? This was new information. Where is the key now? Thomas has it, Richard Jr. replied. He thought you should be there when we open it. At least one of my children had the right instincts. I'll be back in the morning. We'll go to the bank together. After my son left, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine, contemplating the dark water. The lake was still, a perfect black mirror reflecting the stars above. In the distance, the lights of a few other houses dotted the shoreline, but otherwise, I was alone with my thoughts. Richard had been investigating Vivian. He had confronted her. His medication had disappeared. And somewhere in Westlake was a safe deposit box containing what? More evidence? A revised will? A letter explaining his suspicions? Whatever it was important enough for Richard to keep secret, even from his children. And now, perhaps, it would be the key to exposing the truth about his death. I was about to go inside when my phone rang, an unknown number. Mrs. Blackwood, a familiar voice said when I answered. It's James Sullivan. James, I replied coolly. I assume you're calling to tell me you've canceled your meeting with Vivian, as I requested. Not exactly, he sounded nervous. She came to my office after you left. She was insistent on seeing me. My grip tightened on the phone. And what did you tell her? Nothing about your visit, he assured me quickly. But she knows something's wrong. She said she could tell I was hiding something. What did she want? Information about Richard's assets, Sullivan said. Specifically, any accounts or properties that might not be widely known. She mentioned a rumor about offshore holdings. My pulse quickened. Richard had maintained several international accounts for business purposes, accounts that weren't technically part of the estate yet. Was that what Vivian was after? What did you tell her? I asked again. That I had no knowledge of any such accounts, Sullivan replied. But Mrs. Blackwood, she didn't believe me. She made implications about my relationship with Richard, things we might have done that weren't strictly legal. Is there any truth to these implications? I asked sharply. A pause. There may have been some creative accounting over the years. Tax strategies that push the boundaries of legality. I see. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She's blackmailing you. Not explicitly, Sullivan hedged. But the message was clear. If I don't help her access these accounts, she'll go to the authorities with what she knows or claims to know. And how would she know anything about Richard's financial dealings? I pressed. Another hesitation. She claims he told her everything, that they had no secrets. I thought of the private investigator, the secret investigation Richard had conducted without Vivian's knowledge. She's bluffing James. Richard was investigating her, not confiding in her. Maybe, Sullivan didn't sound convinced. But if she does go to the authorities, even unfounded accusations could damage my reputation, my practice. So you're calling to warn me that you might betray me after all? I concluded. No, he said quickly. I'm calling because I think you should know what you're dealing with. She's dangerous, Eleanor. More dangerous than you realize. I'm beginning to understand exactly how dangerous she is, I replied. Thank you for the warning, James. But remember what I said this morning. If you choose to help her, you make yourself my enemy. And right now, you don't want me as an enemy. I ended the call, my mind racing. Vivian was getting desperate, resorting to blackmail to gain access to Richard's assets. She must have realized that her position at Blackwood Manor was untenable now that I had returned. She was looking for an exit strategy and a payout. This could work to my advantage. A desperate Vivian was more likely to make mistakes, to overreach. And when she did, I would be waiting. I was about to call Dawson to update him when I noticed something odd, a faint light moving among the trees at the edge of the property. Too steady for flashlight, too low for car headlights. I moved away from the window, keeping to the shadows as I watched. The light disappeared, then reappeared closer to the house. Someone was approaching through the woods, trying to stay hidden. My first thought was of Richard Jr. Had he forgotten something? But he would have simply driven back up the driveway, not skulked through the forest. Moving quickly, I turned off all the lights in the house, plunging it into darkness. Then I retrieved the small handgun I kept in a lockbox under my bed, a precaution Richard had insisted on years ago, given the isolated location of the lake house. From the darkened living room, I watched as a figure emerged from the trees, tall, slender, moving with purpose toward the deck. In the moonlight, I could make out enough to confirm my suspicion. Vivian. She had followed me here, or perhaps followed Richard Jr., assuming he was meeting me. Either way, she was here now, circling the house like a predator, testing doors and windows. I considered my options. I could confront her. But what then? Without witnesses, it would be my word against hers. I could call the police, but by the time they arrived, she would be gone, and again, I would have no proof of her intentions. No, better to watch and wait, to see what she did when she thought no one was looking. I retreated further into the shadows as she tried the deck door, finding it locked. She moved to a window, peering inside, then disappeared around the side of the house. A moment later, I heard a soft scraping sound from the kitchen, the sound of someone trying to force the old service entrance. Moving silently, I positioned myself in the hallway connecting the kitchen to the main house, the gun steady in my hand. I had no intention of shooting her. That would solve nothing and likely create more problems, but she didn't need to know that. The scraping continued, followed by a soft click as the lock gave way. The door creaked open, and footsteps entered the kitchen. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, as she paused to listen for any sound of occupation. Satisfied the house was empty, she moved forward, entering the hallway where I waited. As she passed my hiding place, I stepped out, the gun aimed at her chest. "Hello, Vivian," I said calmly. "Looking for something?" She froze, her eyes widening in the darkness. "Eleanor, breaking and entering is a serious crime," I continued, as if we were discussing the weather. "As is attempted murder, of course." "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice steadier than I expected. "I saw lights on earlier. When no one answered the door, I was concerned." "Concerned enough to break in through the back door?" She shrugged, seemingly unconcerned by the gun pointed at her. "The door was unlocked." "We both know that's not true," I said. "Just like we both know why you're really here." "And why is that, Eleanor?" she asked, a hint of mockery in her tone. "To finish what you started with Richard," I replied. "To eliminate the last obstacle between you and the Blackwood fortune." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of calculation, of reassessment. "You think I killed Richard? That's absurd." "Is it?" Harold Jenkins might disagree. So might William Hobson. "Oh, but they can't, can they? They're dead. Just like all the other wealthy men who had the misfortune of falling in love with you." Now she did react, a flash of genuine surprise crossing her face before she masked it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Rebecca Winters," I said, watching her closely. "Carolyn Lake." "How many names have you had, Vivian?" "How many men have died, so you could disappear with their money?" "You've lost your mind," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Richard's death unhinged you. First faking your own death, now these wild accusations." "Richard hired a private investigator." I cut her off. "He knew everything about you. He was going to expose you. And then, conveniently, his heart medication disappeared, and he had a fatal attack." For a moment, she said nothing, assessing me with new eyes. Then, remarkably, she smiled. "Clever Eleanor," she said softly. "Always underestimated, weren't you? Even by Richard. He never saw your potential. But I did, from the beginning." "What are you talking about?" "Why do you think I chose Richard?" she asked, taking a step closer despite the gun. "Not just for his money. There are richer men. I chose him because of you." "Me?" I kept the gun steady, though confusion rippled through me. "The perfect wife," Vivian continued. "Dignified, loyal, endlessly patient. Never causing a scene, even when the whole town knew he was unfaithful. You are the perfect cover, Eleanor. As long as Richard had you as his respectable wife, no one looked too closely at his other activities." "What activities?" I demanded, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. She laughed softly. "Oh, Eleanor, did you really think Richard was just a successful businessman? That all that money came from legitimate enterprises? Your husband was laundering money for some very dangerous people. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the mysterious business trips. It wasn't all for Blackwood Industries." I stared at her, trying to process this new information. Richard, involved in money laundering? It seemed impossible. Yet, hadn't there always been aspects of the business he kept from me? Accounts I wasn't supposed to ask about? Partners whose names were never mentioned? "You're lying," I said, but without conviction. "Am I?" She raised an eyebrow. "Ask yourself why a man like Richard would risk his reputation on an affair that everyone in town knew about. He needed me, Eleanor. I was his connection to people he couldn't be seen with publicly. His respectable wife could never know about that side of his life, but he needed someone who could move in those circles." "And killing him? Was that part of your service too?" Her smile faded. "I didn't kill Richard. In fact, I tried to save him." "By stealing his medication?" I scoffed. "By trying to get him out before they came for him," she countered. "Richard was skimming, Eleanor. Taking a bigger cut than he was entitled to. His partners noticed. They wanted their money back, with interest. He was desperate, trying to liquidate assets, change his will, create escape routes. And you were helping him out of the goodness of your heart." I asked skeptically. I was helping him because he promised me a share, she admitted. Enough to disappear, start fresh. But someone got to him first. Someone like you, I insisted. The FBI is looking into your connection to 2 other dead men, Vivian. It's only a matter of time before they connect you to Richard too. Something changed in her expression, a hardening, a calculation. Put the gun down, Eleanor. We both know you're not going to shoot me. Don't be so sure, I replied, though she was right. I had no intention of killing her. I needed her alive, answerable for her crimes. If I wanted you dead, you would be, she said, her voice matter-of-fact. I didn't come here to kill you. I came to warn you. Warn me about what? Richard's partners know about the investigation, she said. They know he kept records, evidence. They think you have it. They think that's why you faked your death, to hide until you could use that evidence as leverage. What evidence? I demanded, my finger tightening on the trigger despite myself. The contents of the safe deposit box, Vivian replied. The one your son Thomas found the key to today. A chill ran through me.
How did she know about that?
Richard Jr. had only told me hours ago. As if reading my thoughts, she smiled thinly. You're not the only one with sources in the Blackwood household, Eleanor. The staff talk. The children talk. Everyone talks, eventually. What's in the box? I asked. Names. Dates. Account numbers. Everything needed to bring down an entire network. She took another step closer. Richard was insurance. As long as he had that information secured, his partners wouldn't touch him. But now they think you have it, or will have it soon. They won't let you open that box, Eleanor. Why are you telling me this? I asked, suspicion replacing shock. Why warn me? Because I want the same thing you do, she said simply.
To survive.
And right now, our best chance of survival is working together. I almost laughed. Work with the woman who stole my husband, moved into my house, and may have killed him? Do you think I'm insane? I think you're practical, she replied. And I think you want to know the truth about Richard, the whole truth, not just the parts you've pieced together. I can give you that. In exchange for what? A share of what's in those offshore accounts, she said without hesitation. Enough to disappear. In return, I'll tell you everything about Richard, about his partners, about what really happened the night he died. I studied her in the dim light, trying to read the truth in her eyes. Was this another manipulation? Another lie designed to get her what she wanted? Or was there a kernel of truth here, something I needed to understand before proceeding? How do I know you won't just take the money and disappear? I asked. Like you did with Jenkins and Hobson? You don't, she admitted. But right now, I'm your best source of information about the people coming after that safe deposit box. And believe me, Eleanor, they're coming. As if to punctuate her words, headlights swept across the windows, a car turning into the driveway. We both tensed, moving instinctively away from the windows. Expecting someone? Vivian asked, her voice tight. No, I replied, moving to peer through the curtains. A black SUV was pulling up beside my car, different from Richard Jr.'s vehicle, different from Dawson's. 2 men emerged, their faces obscured in the darkness. One moved toward the front door while the other circled toward the back of the house, where the door Vivian had forced open remained unlocked. Friends of yours? I asked Vivian, noting the flash of genuine fear on her face. No, she whispered, but I know who sent them. We need to leave, now. We. I raised an eyebrow. There is no we, Vivian. There is if you want to live through the night, she hissed. Those men aren't here to talk, Eleanor. They're here to clean up loose ends. Both of us. I hesitated, torn between disbelief and the cold certainty that she was telling the truth, at least about the immediate danger. The men's methodical approach, their silent coordination, spoke of professional training. If they were merely burglars, they would have been more hesitant, less purposeful. There's a path through the woods, I said finally, lowering the gun slightly. It leads to the neighbor's dock. We can take their boat. Vivian nodded, already moving toward the kitchen. Lead the way. I followed, keeping the gun ready, still not entirely trusting her but recognizing that our immediate survival might depend on cooperation. As we reached the kitchen, I heard the front door handle turning, a soft, careful sound that confirmed these weren't ordinary intruders. We slipped out through the service entrance Vivian had forced earlier, staying low and moving quickly toward the tree line. Behind us, I heard the front door open, followed by soft footsteps entering the house. The path was narrow and overgrown, barely visible in the moonlight. I led the way, familiar with every root and stone from decades of summers spent here. Vivian followed close behind, her breathing quick but controlled. "Who are they?" I whispered as we paused behind a large oak, checking for pursuit. "Richard's partners," she replied. "Or rather, their cleanup crew. They don't leave witnesses, Eleanor." "And how do you know so much about them?" Even in the darkness, I could sense her sardonic smile. "Because I used to work for them before I decided independent contracting was more profitable." The implications of that statement chilled me more than the night air. What kind of woman was Vivian really? Not just a black widow, but something more complex, more dangerous? We continued through the woods, the lake occasionally visible through the trees, a silver expanse in the moonlight. The Petersons' dock was just ahead, their small motorboat tethered at the end. "Wait." I grabbed Vivian's arm as we reached the edge of the trees. "How do I know this isn't a trap? That you didn't lead those men here? If I wanted you dead, I would have let them find you in the house," she replied impatiently. "Now can we please?" A twig snapped behind us, followed by a beam of light sweeping through the trees. They had discovered our escape and were following the path. "Go." I pushed Vivian toward the dock. "Start the boat. I'll be right behind you." She hesitated for a split second, then nodded and darted toward the dock, keeping low. I waited at the edge of the trees, watching as she reached the boat and began working on the motor. The flashlight beam was getting closer. I could hear footsteps now, rapid and purposeful. They would reach our position in moments. I had to make a choice: trust Vivian and escape with her, or stay and face these men, demand answers about their connection to Richard, about what was in the safe deposit box. But facing them meant risking my life, and I had come too far, survived too much, to die now. My children needed me. The truth about Richard needed to be uncovered. And for that, I needed to survive this night. Decision made, I stepped out from the trees and ran for the dock, no longer bothering with stealth. Behind me, a shout confirmed I had been spotted. The flashlight beam found me, freezing me in its glare for a heartbeat before I continued running. At the dock, Vivian had the motor idling. "Hurry," she called, extending her hand as I leaped into the boat. The motor roared to life as a shot rang out, splintering wood near my head. Vivian steered us away from the dock, accelerating into the darkness of the lake as more shots followed, splashing into the water around us. "Keep down," Vivian shouted over the engine, steering erratically to make us a harder target. I crouched in the bottom of the boat, heart pounding, the reality of the situation crashing over me. Someone had just tried to kill me. To kill us. Whatever Richard had been involved in, it was deadly serious. And now I was fleeing across a lake in the middle of the night with the very woman I had suspected of murdering my husband. As the shots faded behind us and the shore receded into darkness, I looked up at Vivian, her face illuminated by the boat's small running lights. She was focused, competent, steering us toward the opposite shore with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. "Where are we going?" I called over the engine noise. "There's a marina on the south shore," she replied. "We can leave the boat there and find transportation. We need to get back to Westlake before they do."
Why?
"What's in Westlake that's so important?" She gave me a look that suggested the answer should be obvious. "The safe deposit box. Whatever Richard left in there, it's valuable enough that they're willing to kill for it. And your family is planning to open it tomorrow morning." The implications hit me like a physical blow. My children, Richard Jr., Thomas, Catherine, they were in danger. If these men believed the contents of the box were a threat, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who might have seen those contents. "We need to warn them," I said urgently. "First, we need to survive the night, Vivian countered. Then we can decide how to proceed. Decide? I stared at her incredulously. There's nothing to decide. Those are my children, Vivian. I'm not going to let them walk into danger. And I'm not going to let you throw away our only leverage, she snapped. That box contains information worth millions, Eleanor. Information that could buy us safety, new identities, new lives far from here. Us. I repeated, anger rising. There is no us, Vivian. The only reason I'm in this boat with you is because someone was shooting at me. That doesn't make us allies, and it certainly doesn't make us partners. She studied me for a long moment, then shook her head with a rueful smile. You really don't understand what you're involved in, do you? This isn't about you and me anymore, Eleanor. This is about survival. And like it or not, right now, we need each other. I wanted to argue, to deny any connection between us, but the events of the night had shaken my certainties. Who were those men? What had Richard been involved in? And what was in that safe deposit box that was worth killing for? As we approached the marina, its lights a faint glow in the distance, I realized that I needed answers more than I needed vengeance. And right now, Vivian Pierce, or whatever her real name was, might be my best source of those answers. If we do this, I said carefully, if I agree to work with you temporarily, I need your word that my children will be protected. That's non-negotiable. Your children are already protected by their ignorance, Vivian replied. As long as they don't open that box without us present, they should be safe. Should be isn't good enough, I insisted. I want your word, Vivian. Whatever skills or connections you have, whatever resources, they go toward ensuring my family's safety first. She considered this, then nodded. Agreed. But in return, I want to guarantee that when this is over, I get my share and safe passage. No police, no FBI. If you're innocent of Richard's death, I said, I'll consider it. But I need proof, Vivian. Real proof, not just your word. Fair enough, she conceded. We should be able to find that proof in the box, if I'm right about what Richard stored there. As we neared the marina, she cut the engine, letting the boat drift the final distance to avoid attracting attention. The dock was deserted at this late hour, the boats dark and silent. What now? I asked as we secured the Petersons' boat. We have no car, no phones. Now we find transportation, Vivian said, leading the way toward the marina office. And then we get back to Westlake before those men do. And how exactly do we do that? I asked, following reluctantly. She turned, a familiar smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The same smile she had used to charm my husband, my children, half of Westlake society. Trust me, Eleanor. Breaking and entering isn't the only skill in my repertoire. I had little choice but to follow as she moved confidently through the darkened marina. Whatever her true nature, whatever her real intentions, Vivian had just saved my life. And for now, at least, our interests aligned. But as I watched her pick the lock on the marina office with practiced ease, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The moment our interests diverged, she would not hesitate to betray me. And I needed to be ready when that moment came. Inside the office, Vivian found a set of keys in a lockbox behind the counter. Emergency vehicle, she explained, dangling the keys. For marina staff. You're stealing a car now? I asked, though I knew the answer. Borrowing, she corrected. Under the circumstances, I think it's justified. The emergency vehicle turned out to be an old pickup truck parked behind the marina workshop. Vivian hot-wired it with disturbing efficiency, the engine rumbling to life within minutes. Get in, she said, sliding behind the wheel. We have a long drive ahead of us. As we pulled onto the main road, leaving the lake behind, I stared out at the darkness, my mind racing with questions, theories, fears. Whatever Richard had been involved in, it had gotten him killed. Whatever was in that safe deposit box, it was dangerous enough that people were willing to kill for it. And somehow, I had become entangled in a web of secrets and lies that stretched far beyond my husband's infidelity, beyond Vivian's deceptions, into something darker and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. How deep was Richard's involvement? I asked finally, breaking the silence that had fallen between us. Vivian kept her eyes on the road. Deeper than he wanted to admit. At first, it was just providing a legitimate front for certain transactions. Then it became more active participation. Money laundering. I said, the word still difficult to associate with my husband, the respected businessman, pillar of the community. Among other things, she nodded. Richard had connections, respectability. He could move in circles that his partners couldn't access. It made him valuable. And you? What was your role in all this? She glanced at me, a fleeting look I couldn't quite interpret. Initially, I was sent to keep an eye on him, make sure he wasn't skimming too much off the top. Become close enough to report back. And then I saw an opportunity, she admitted. Richard was unhappy, restless. Trapped in a marriage that had become a habit rather than a passion. Vulnerable to attention. The blunt assessment stung, even after all this time. So, you seduced him on orders. At first, she agreed. But later, it became something else. A partnership of sorts. Richard was smart,
Eleanor.
He figured out who I was, what I was doing. Instead of ending things, he proposed a new arrangement. We would work together, create our own exit strategy. Take enough to disappear, start fresh somewhere new. Without me, I noted bitterly. Yes, she didn't bother to soften the truth. Without you, Richard was planning to divorce you, leave you comfortable but not wealthy. Enough that you wouldn't fight the settlement. I absorbed this, the final confirmation of what I had suspected for years, that Richard had never intended to grow old with me, that his promises of reconciliation, of second chances, had been lies designed to keep me compliant until he was ready to discard me. What changed? I asked. Why didn't this plan succeed? Vivian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Richard got greedy. He wasn't content with just our share. He wanted more insurance, he called it. So he started collecting evidence, documentation of transactions, names, dates. Enough to threaten exposure if his partners ever came after him. The contents of the safe deposit box, I guessed. Yes, she confirmed. But he made a mistake. He kept records of his own activities too, detailed, incriminating records that would destroy him if they ever became public. It was supposed to be mutually assured destruction, but he didn't understand who he was dealing with. And you did. Her laugh was hollow. Better than most. I had worked for them longer, knew what they were capable of. I tried to warn him, to tell him he was overplaying his hand. But Richard always thought he was the smartest person in the room. The description was painfully accurate. Richard's confidence, bordering on arrogance, had been both his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. So they killed him, I said quietly, because of what he knew. Because of what he threatened to expose. Vivian corrected. The heart attack might have been natural. I genuinely don't know. But the missing medication ensured it would be fatal. And you had nothing to do with that? I pressed, still not entirely convinced of her innocence. She was silent for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. I didn't take his medication, she said finally. But I knew someone might. I warned him, told him to be careful. He dismissed my concerns, said he had everything under control. His last words, I murmured, remembering the report from the housekeeper who had found him. Mrs. Fletcher said he was trying to say something about control when she found him. He always thought he had control, Vivian said bitterly, right up until the moment he didn't. We lapsed into silence again, the truck eating up the miles back toward Westlake. Dawn was still hours away, but already I could feel the weight of the coming day, the confrontation with whatever was in that safe deposit box, the danger that awaited us, the impossible alliance I had formed with the woman who had stolen my husband and possibly contributed to his death. Why did you stay? I asked suddenly. After Richard died, when the will wasn't changed. Why stay in Westlake instead of disappearing? Because I still needed what was in that box, she replied. And I thought you might have access to it. When you died, or seemed to, I saw an opportunity to ingratiate myself with your children, to search for clues about where Richard might have hidden the key. And when I returned, her mouth curved in a reluctant smile. I have to admit, Eleanor, that was masterfully done. I never suspected. You always seemed so conventional. So predictable. People often see what they expect to see, I observed. Indeed, she agreed. And now here we are, the grieving widow and the scheming mistress, fleeing for our lives in a stolen truck. Borrowed, I corrected dryly. Her laugh surprised me, genuine, almost warm. Touché, Eleanor. Perhaps we're not so different after all. We are nothing alike, I said firmly, refusing to acknowledge the strange camaraderie that had begun to form between us. This is a temporary alliance, nothing more. Of course, she nodded, though her smile remained. Temporary. As we approached the outskirts of Westlake, the first hint of dawn was lightening the eastern sky. We had driven through the night, alternating at the wheel, stopping only once for gas at a deserted station where Vivian had paid in cash from a roll of bills she produced from her boot. Where to? Vivian asked as we entered the familiar streets of the town I had called home for nearly 3 decades. I considered our options. We couldn't go to Blackwood Manor. If those men were looking for us, that would be the first place they'd check. We needed somewhere safe, somewhere unexpected, to regroup and plan our next move. Claire's, I decided. My sister's house. No one would think to look for us there. Vivian nodded, turning the truck toward the east side of town where Claire lived in a modest colonial that had been our parents' home. As we pulled up, the house was dark, the street quiet. Wait here, I said, getting out of the truck. I'll make sure it's safe. Approaching my sister's front door, I felt a wave of guilt for what I was about to do, dragging Claire into this dangerous situation. But I needed a safe haven, and Claire was the only person I trusted completely. I rang the bell, then knocked when there was no immediate answer. After a moment, lights came on inside, and Claire appeared at the door in her robe, her face showing alarm that quickly transformed to relief when she saw me. Eleanor, she pulled me into a tight hug. Thank God you're all right. Richard Jr. called, said you weren't answering your phone, that he was worried about you. I'm fine, I assured her, though nothing could be further from the truth. But I need your help, Claire. It's urgent. Of course, she stepped back, ushering me inside. Anything. I hesitated, then turned back toward the truck. I'm not alone. Claire followed my gaze, her expression changing to confusion, then shock as Vivian emerged from the vehicle. Eleanor, what? I'll explain everything, I promised. But right now, we need to come inside. It's not safe out here. My sister's confusion deepened, but she nodded, her trust in me overriding her natural suspicion of Vivian. As Vivian approached, Claire's posture stiffened, but she said nothing, simply holding the door wider to admit both of us. Inside, in Claire's warm, cluttered living room, I began the impossible task of explaining what had happened, Richard's secret activities, the men at the lake house, the safe deposit box that might contain answers, or more danger, or both. Claire listened in stunned silence, her eyes moving between me and Vivian, who stood by the window, keeping watch on the street outside. This is insane, Claire said finally. Richard, involved in money laundering? Men trying to kill you? And now you're working with her? She gestured toward Vivian, not bothering to hide her distaste. Temporarily, I emphasized. Until we find out what's in that box, until we understand what Richard was involved in. And then what? Claire demanded. You go to the police? The FBI? These people tried to kill you, Eleanor. One step at a time, I said, though I had been asking myself the same questions. Right now, the priority is keeping my children safe, making sure they don't open that box without understanding the risks. Your children are already awake, Vivian called from the window. Richard Jr.'s car just pulled up outside Blackwood Manor. I moved to join her, peering through the curtains at the scene across town, visible from Claire's hillside home. Sure enough, lights were on at Blackwood Manor, and Richard Jr.'s distinctive silver Mercedes was in the driveway. What time is it? I asked, alarmed. Just past 6, Claire replied. Why? The bank opens at 8, I said, my heart racing. If they're already up, already gathering. They might go early, Vivian finished. Try to be there when the bank opens. We need to go, I turned to Claire. I need to borrow your car. I'm coming with you, she said firmly, already moving toward her bedroom. Just let me get dressed. Claire, it's too dangerous. It's my family too, she cut me off. And I'm not letting you face this alone. Especially not with her as your only ally. She disappeared into her bedroom, closing the door with a finality that brooked no argument. Left alone with Vivian, I felt the weight of our strange partnership pressing down on me. If anything happens to my children because of this, I said quietly, I will hold you personally responsible. Nothing will happen to them, she replied, her tone serious. Not if we get there first. Claire reappeared, dressed and carrying her car keys. Let's go. As we headed for the door, my phone rang, Richard Jr.'s number flashing on the screen. I answered immediately, my heart in my throat. Mother, his voice was tense.
Where are you?
We've been trying to reach you all night. I'm at Claire's, I replied, signaling to the others to wait. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said, but his tone belied his words. We're going to the bank when it opens. Thomas has the key. We thought you'd want to be there.
I confirmed.
But Richard, listen to me carefully. Do not open that box without me. It could be dangerous. Dangerous? He repeated. Mother, what are you talking about? I can't explain over the phone, I said urgently. Just wait for me. Promise me you'll wait. A pause, then. We'll wait. But Mother, you need to tell us what's going on. I will, I promised. When I see you. And Richard, be careful. Don't trust anyone. I ended the call, meeting Vivian's gaze. They're going to the bank when it opens. They promised to wait for me. Do you believe them? She asked. I thought of Richard Jr.'s voice, the tension, the urgency. No, I admitted. I think they're going now. They want to know what's in that box, and they don't want to wait. Then we need to hurry, Claire said, leading the way to her car. As we drove toward Westlake Central Bank, I tried to organize my thoughts to prepare for what might be coming. If Richard Jr. and Thomas reached the box before us, if they opened it and found evidence of Richard's illegal activities. No, I couldn't think about that now. I needed to focus on getting there first, on protecting my children from whatever dangers lurked in Richard's past. There, Vivian pointed ahead. Richard Jr.'s car. They're already at the bank. Sure enough, the silver Mercedes was parked in the nearly empty lot of Westlake Central Bank. Despite the early hour, lights were on inside, the staff preparing to open, or perhaps already admitting my sons given the Blackwood family's standing in the community. Claire pulled in beside Richard Jr.'s car, and we hurried toward the bank's entrance. Through the glass doors, I could see Richard Jr. and Thomas at the reception desk, speaking with the manager. They were being led toward the vault area, where the safe deposit boxes were kept. We were too late. As we reached the doors, a black SUV pulled into the lot, the same type of vehicle I had seen at the lake house. Two men emerged, moving with purpose toward the bank. They're here, Vivian said urgently. We need to get inside now. Claire pushed open the doors and we rushed in, startling the receptionist who was just setting up for the day. My sons, I said breathlessly. Richard and Thomas Blackwood. They just went to access a safe deposit box. It's urgent that I join them. Mrs. Blackwood, the young woman recognized me, though her expression showed confusion. No doubt she had heard of my supposed death. Yes, Mr. Hargrove just took them back. I can. Now, I insisted. Please, it's a family emergency. Perhaps sensing my desperation, or simply responding to the authority in my voice, she nodded and pressed a button to unlock the security door leading to the vault area. Through there, down the hall to the left. We hurried through, Vivian close behind me, Claire bringing up the rear. Behind us, I heard the front doors open again, the men from the SUV entering the bank. The vault area was quiet, the thick walls muffling sounds from the main bank. Ahead, I could see a partially open door leading to a private room where customers could examine the contents of their safe deposit boxes. From inside, I heard Thomas's voice, raised in shock or alarm. What the hell is this? Dad was involved in. I pushed the door open, Richard Jr. and Thomas turning in surprise at our entrance. On the table before them was an open box, papers spread out across the surface. Mother? Thomas stepped forward. What are you doing here? And why is she with you? His eyes narrowed as he recognized Vivian. There's no time to explain, I said quickly. We need to leave, now. Those papers, whatever they are, they're dangerous. Men are coming, men who'll kill to get them. Richard Jr. stared at me in disbelief. Mother, what are you talking about? These are just financial records. Dad's private accounts, some offshore holdings. Nothing worth killing for. You don't understand, Vivian interjected. Those records are evidence of money laundering, of criminal activity. Your father was involved with dangerous people. And we should believe you? Thomas scoffed. After everything you've done? Yes, I said firmly. Just this once, we need to trust her. Richard, Thomas, please. We need to go now. Something in my voice, in my expression, must have convinced them. Richard Jr. began gathering the papers, stuffing them back into the box. Too late, Vivian said softly from the doorway. They're here. I turned to see the two men from the SUV approaching down the hallway, their movements casual but purposeful. One was speaking to the bank manager, who was nodding and smiling, clearly not sensing any danger. Is there another way out? I asked urgently. Emergency exit. Thomas pointed to a door at the back of the room. But it will trigger an alarm. Good, Vivian said grimly. We want attention right now. Witnesses. Richard Jr. finished gathering the papers, clutching them rather than returning them to the box. What are we doing, Mother? Running from bank customers? Those aren't customers, I said, my voice low. They're the same men who shot at us at the lake house last night. They work for Richard's former partners and they want those papers. My sons exchanged a look of alarm, finally beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Go, Vivian urged, moving toward the emergency exit. I'll hold them off.
How?
I demanded. They're armed. So am I, she replied, producing a small handgun from inside her jacket, the same jacket she had been wearing when she broke into the lake house. Had she been armed the entire time? Before I could process this, the men reached the door to our room, the bank manager still beside them, making introductions. Mrs. Blackwood, he began. These gentlemen say they're associates of your late husband here to... He never finished the sentence. One of the men pushed past him, his eyes fixed on the papers in Richard Jr.'s hands. The other reached inside his jacket. Get down, Vivian shouted, raising her gun. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The manager's eyes widened in shock. The first man lunged toward Richard Jr. The second produced a gun of his own. Vivian fired, the sound deafening in the small room. Claire screamed. Thomas grabbed his brother, pulling him toward the emergency exit. I moved to follow, but not before seeing the first man crumple to the floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. The second man returned fire, bullets splintering the doorframe. Vivian pushed me toward the exit, firing again over her shoulder. The emergency door burst open under Thomas's weight, an alarm immediately blaring throughout the bank. We spilled out into the morning light, Richard Jr. still clutching the papers, Claire pale with shock, Vivian backing out last, her gun still trained on the doorway. Run, she shouted, and we did, racing toward Claire's car as the alarm continued to wail. Behind us, chaos erupted from the bank. Shouts, screams, the sound of more gunfire. The peaceful morning in Westlake had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. As we reached the car, I glanced back to see the second man emerge from the emergency exit, blood visible on his sleeve, but his gun still in hand. His eyes met mine across the parking lot, cold and calculating. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that this was far from over. Whatever was in those papers, whatever secrets Richard had kept, they had now become my burden, my danger. And the only person who seemed to understand the full scope of that danger was the woman I had sworn to destroy, Vivian Pierce, my husband's mistress, possibly his killer, and now, incredibly, my ally in survival. The man raised his gun, aiming directly at us. Vivian pushed me into the car, then turned and fired again, forcing him to duck behind a vehicle. Drive, she shouted to Claire, who had already started the engine. As we peeled out of the parking lot, sirens wailing in the distance, I turned to Richard Jr., who sat beside me in the back seat, still clutching the papers from the safe deposit box. "What exactly did your father leave in that box?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard Jr. looked down at the papers, his face ashen. "Everything, Mother. Absolutely everything." In the distance, the sirens grew louder, approaching the bank where a man lay dead or dying, where our fingerprints were everywhere, where the security cameras had captured it all. The confrontation, the shooting, our escape. There would be no going back from this. No return to the life I had known. Everything had changed in the space of a heartbeat, just as it had when I walked into my dining room and found Vivian Pierce declaring, "This is my house now." Only this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. This wasn't about a house, or a husband's infidelity, or even a family's legacy. This was about survival, about secrets that killed, about a past that refused to stay buried. And as Claire's car sped away from Westlake Central Bank, from the only community I had ever called home, I realized with perfect clarity that my resurrection had set in motion events I could never have anticipated, dangers I could never have imagined. The game had changed, the players revealed, the stakes raised to life and death. And somewhere in those papers, in Richard's meticulous records, lay the truth that would either save us or destroy us all. Claire's car raced through the streets of Westlake, taking random turns, doubling back, making sure we weren't followed. In the back seat, Richard Jr. spread the papers across his lap, his hands trembling slightly as he sorted through them. If you're still following my story, hit that subscribe button now, because what we discovered in those papers changed everything I thought I knew about the man I'd been married to for 27 years. Some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some truths can get you killed. "What is it?" I asked, leaning over to see what had rendered my normally composed son so shaken. "What did your father leave in that box?" Richard Jr. looked up, his face ashen. "Financial records, offshore accounts, shell companies. But that's not all." He handed me a thin folder. "Look at this." I opened it to find photographs, surveillance photos of Richard with men I didn't recognize, meeting in hotel lobbies, restaurants, private clubs. The dates on the photos spanned years, going back to the early days of our marriage. "Who are these people?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. According to these notes, Richard Jr. indicated papers with Richard's distinctive handwriting. They're members of the Castellano organization. Mother, Dad was laundering money for the mob. The words hung in the air, impossible yet undeniable. I stared at the photos, at my husband's familiar face, smiling and relaxed in the company of criminals. "Let me see," Vivian said from the front passenger seat, turning to reach for the photos. Richard Jr. pulled them back, his eyes narrowing. "Why should we trust you with any of this? For all we know, you're working with them." "If I were working with them," Vivian replied calmly, "you'd be dead, and I'd have those papers. The fact that we're all sitting in this car, alive, should tell you something. She saved our lives," I reminded my son reluctantly. "At the bank. She's earned at least a little trust." Richard Jr. hesitated, then handed the photos to Vivian, who studied them with narrowed eyes. "Antonio Castellano," she said, pointing to a distinguished-looking man in one photo. "Head of the family. And that's Victor Ramirez, their financial architect. Your father was working directly with the top echelon." "How do you know that?" Thomas demanded from beside her. Vivian gave him a sidelong look. "Because I used to work for them too. That's how I met your father." "So, you are what, a mob courier who seduced my father?" Richard Jr. asked bitterly. "I was a financial specialist who recognized your father's potential," she corrected. "The seduction came later, and it was mutual, I assure you." "Where are we going?" Claire interrupted, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "We can't just drive around forever. The police will be looking for us after what happened at the bank. We need somewhere safe," I said, trying to think clearly despite the shock of what we'd discovered. "Somewhere they wouldn't look for us." "The hunting cabin," Thomas suggested suddenly. "Dad's old place in the mountains. No one's been there in years." Richard Sr. had purchased a remote cabin in the Adirondacks 15 years ago, supposedly for hunting trips with clients. I had visited only once, finding it too rustic, too isolated for my taste. Now its isolation seemed like a blessing. That might work, I agreed. But we need supplies, and we need to make sure we're not followed. And we need to understand exactly what's in these papers, Vivian added. Because right now we're running blind. Claire took the next exit off the highway, pulling into a shopping center parking lot. I'll get supplies, she offered.
Food, water, first aid.
You all stay in the car. I'll go with you, Thomas said. You shouldn't be alone. As they left, Richard Jr., Vivian, and I remained in tense silence, the papers from the safe deposit box spread between us. Tell me everything, I said to Vivian. How deep was Richard's involvement? How much danger are we in? She met my gaze directly. Your husband was their primary money launderer for nearly 20 years. The Blackwood business interests provided perfect cover: real estate, import, export, investment funds. The legitimate profits disguised the illegal ones. And my children? I asked, my heart racing. Were they involved? Not directly, she replied. Richard kept them insulated. Made sure they knew enough to run the legitimate side of the business, but not enough to implicate them in the criminal activities. Then why are they after us now? Richard Jr. demanded. If we're not involved, if we don't know anything. Because of those. Vivian nodded toward the papers. Your father kept records of everything: dates, amounts, names. It's an insurance policy, but it's also a death sentence if the wrong people find out you have it. So what do we do? I asked, the enormity of our situation beginning to sink in. Go to the FBI? Turn state's evidence. With what protection? Vivian countered. The Castellanos have people everywhere: police, FBI, judiciary. Until we know who we can trust, we're safer on our own. Richard Jr. laughed bitterly. Safer with the woman who was sleeping with our father behind our mother's back? The woman who might have killed him? Forgive me if I don't find that reassuring. I didn't kill your father, Vivian said, her voice suddenly hard. If anything, I tried to save him. I warned him he was taking too much, skimming too deeply from the accounts he managed. I told him they would notice. And did they? I asked quietly. She nodded. 3 days before he died, he received a message from Antonio Castellano himself. A demand for a meeting for a full accounting. Richard knew what that meant. He was preparing to run, to use those records as leverage for his safety. But he never got the chance. I murmured, the pieces falling into place. His heart medication disappeared, and he had a fatal attack. Convenient timing, Richard Jr. noted coldly, looking at Vivian. Think what you want, she replied. But I had nothing to gain from Richard's death before the will was changed. Everything I'd worked for, everything we'd planned together, died with him. Before we could continue, Thomas and Claire returned with bags of supplies. We should go, Thomas said urgently. I saw a police car at the gas station across the street. They might be looking for us already. We quickly rearranged ourselves, with Thomas taking the wheel this time, Claire beside him, and Richard Jr., Vivian, and I in the back, the precious papers secured in a backpack between us. As we pulled back onto the highway, heading north toward the mountains, I found myself in the impossible position of sitting between my eldest son and my husband's mistress, both now allies in a desperate flight from forces I had never imagined would touch my carefully ordered life. What about Catherine? I asked suddenly, remembering my middle child. She doesn't know any of this. She could be in danger. I texted her from the store, Thomas said. Told her to go to Judith's house and stay there until we contact her. I was vague, but I think she understood it was urgent. I nodded, grateful for his foresight. Judith, my oldest friend, would keep Catherine safe until we figured out our next move. The drive to the hunting cabin took nearly 3 hours, winding through increasingly remote mountain roads. We stopped twice to switch cars, once at a rural bus station where Claire left her car and we rented another under Thomas's name, and again at a small-town car dealership where Richard Jr. paid cash for an aging SUV that wouldn't attract attention. By late afternoon, we were deep in the mountains, following a narrow dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. The autumn foliage blazed around us, a riot of red and gold that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. "It should be just ahead," Thomas said, slowing as we approached a bend in the road. If I remember correctly. The cabin appeared suddenly, a sturdy log structure nestled among tall pines, overlooking a small, crystal-clear lake. It was larger than I remembered, with a stone chimney and a wide porch wrapping around two sides. "Home sweet home," Richard Jr. said dryly as we pulled up to the front. "At least until we figure out our next move." Inside, the cabin was dusty but otherwise well-maintained. Someone, probably the caretaker Richard had hired, had been checking on it periodically. There was firewood stacked by the stone fireplace, canned goods in the pantry, and propane for the generator that provided electricity. "We should be safe here for a while," Thomas said, drawing curtains across the windows. "The property is registered to a shell corporation. It would take some digging to connect it to our family." "Don't underestimate the Castellanos," Vivian warned. "They have resources, connections, and they want those papers." "Then let's see exactly what we have," I said decisively, clearing the large dining table. "Spread everything out, organize it. We need to understand what we're dealing with." For the next 2 hours, we worked methodically through the contents of the safe deposit box, sorting papers into categories: financial records, surveillance photos, personal notes, and a collection of small digital storage devices, flash drives, and memory cards. Richard's record-keeping had been meticulous, as I had expected. Every transaction was documented, every meeting noted with dates and participants. The scope of his involvement was staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars moved through Blackwood Enterprises over 2 decades, laundered and redistributed to Castellano operations around the world. "Look at this," Richard Jr. said, holding up a ledger. Dad was skimming from every transaction. Small amounts, 1 or 2%, but over time. "It adds up to nearly 30 million, Vivian finished, looking over his shoulder. "Hidden in accounts even the Castellanos don't know about." "Is that what they're after?" Claire asked. "The money he stole from them?" "Partly," Vivian nodded. "But these are more valuable." She tapped the flash drives. Account details, contact information, the entire structure of their financial operation. With this, law enforcement could dismantle the Castellano empire. "So we have leverage," Thomas said slowly. "We could negotiate." "Negotiate with the mob?" Claire looked horrified. "Thomas, these people killed your father. They tried to kill us at the bank." "We don't know they killed Dad," Thomas argued. His heart condition was real. The attack could have been natural. "And the missing medication?" I asked quietly. "The timing? You think that was coincidence?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. None of us wanted to confront the full implications of what we had discovered, that Richard's death might have been a carefully orchestrated murder, designed to look like natural causes. "We need to see what's on these drives," Vivian said finally, picking up one of the small storage devices. "There's a laptop in the study. Richard used to keep it here for work emergencies." Sure enough, in the small room Richard had used as an office, we found a laptop locked in a desk drawer. Richard Jr. tried several combinations before the correct password, Catherine's birthday, unlocked it. The first drive contained what appeared to be banking records, transfers, account numbers, beneficiaries. The second held photographs, more surveillance images of meetings, parties, handshakes that sealed criminal deals. It was the third drive that changed everything. "Oh my God," Richard Jr. breathed as the files opened on the screen. Dad was recording them. Every meeting, every conversation. The drive contained dozens of audio files, each labeled with a date and location. Richard had been secretly recording his meetings with the Castellanos for years, creating an archive of incriminating evidence that could send the entire organization to prison. "Play the last one," I said, a chill running through me. The last recording before he died. Richard Jr. clicked on the file dated 3 days before his father's death. The room filled with Richard's voice, tense but controlled, and another voice, deeper, accented, menacing. "You've been skimming, Richard. Did you think we wouldn't notice?" "Antonio, there's been a misunderstanding." The discrepancies are due to exchange rate fluctuations, nothing more. Don't insult my intelligence. We've been tracking the discrepancies for months. Small amounts, carefully hidden, but they add up. 30 million adds up. I can explain. Save it. You have 3 days to return every cent, with interest, and to provide a complete accounting of all operations for the past 5 years. That's impossible in 3 days. I need more time. You don't dictate terms to me, Richard. 3 days, or we'll have this conversation with your wife instead. Maybe Eleanor would be more cooperative once she understands the situation. My blood froze at the mention of my name. They had been willing to drag me into this, to use me as leverage against Richard. Leave my family out of this. Richard's voice had hardened. They know nothing. Then keep it that way, and make this right. 3 days, Richard. And don't even think about running. There's nowhere you can go that we won't find you. The recording ended, leaving us in stunned silence. That was Antonio Castellano, Vivian said unnecessarily, the head of the family. That meeting was at the Westlake Country Club in a private dining room. I was there, seated at the next table, watching. 3 days later, Dad was dead, Thomas said quietly, after being threatened by a mob boss. And his heart medication went missing, I added, ensuring the heart attack would be fatal. The Castellanos don't leave loose ends, Vivian confirmed. Especially not loose ends with evidence like this. So they killed him, Richard Jr. said flatly. And now they're after us, because they think we have the money and the evidence. We do have the evidence, I pointed out. And according to these records, we might be able to find the money too. So, what do we do? Claire asked, her voice small in the growing darkness of the cabin. Go to the FBI? Try to make a deal? First, we need to find the money, Vivian said decisively. It's our only leverage. Without it, the Castellanos have no reason to leave us alive, even if we hand over all the evidence. And you just happen to know how to access stolen mob money? Richard Jr. asked skeptically. I know how your father thought, she replied. I know the systems he used, the methods. With these records, I can trace the funds. I studied her face, trying to read her true intentions. Was she really trying to help us? Or was this another manipulation, a way to get the money for herself? Why would you help us? I asked directly. What's in it for you? Her eyes met mine, and for once, I saw no calculation there, only a weariness that matched my own. Because I want out, she said simply. I've been in this life too long, Eleanor. Richard promised me a way out, a new start. With him gone, you're my only chance at that fresh start. You expect us to trust you? Thomas asked incredulously. No, she shook her head. I expect you to be pragmatic. You need me to find the money. I need you to survive. It's a partnership of necessity, nothing more. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the woods around the cabin black and silent. Richard Jr. started a fire in the fireplace while Claire prepared a simple meal from the supplies we'd brought. The normalcy of these actions felt surreal against the backdrop of what we had discovered, what we had become, fugitives, targets, keepers of deadly secrets. After dinner, as we continued to pore over Richard's records, a new question began to form in my mind, one I had been avoiding since we first opened the safe deposit box. How much did you know? I asked Richard Jr. directly. About your father's activities? My son stiffened, his eyes meeting mine across the table. What are you asking, Mother? I'm asking if you were involved, I said, my voice steady despite the pain the question caused me. If you knew what your father was doing, if you participated in any way. How can you ask me that? He demanded, anger flashing in his eyes. Do you think I would knowingly involve myself with criminals? With people who murder and extort and destroy lives? Your father did, I pointed out quietly. For 20 years, apparently. And you worked closely with him. You were being groomed to take over the business. The legitimate business, he insisted. Dad kept the other activities separate, compartmentalized. Are you sure about that? I pressed. Because according to these records, several of the shell companies you managed were used to move Castellano money. Richard Jr.'s face paled. That's impossible. I would have known. Would you? Vivian asked, her tone neutral. Richard was careful. He made sure the paperwork looked legitimate. You might have been handling criminal funds without realizing it. My son shook his head, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. I need to check something, he said abruptly, reaching for the laptop. For the next hour, he worked in tense silence, cross-referencing his own records, which he had accessed remotely through the cabin's satellite internet, with the information from the safe deposit box. As he worked, his face grew increasingly grim. Mother, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I think she's right. 3 of the companies I've been managing appear in these laundering records. The transactions look legitimate to me, but the endpoints, they match known Castellano fronts. You didn't know, I said firmly, reaching for his hand. Richard kept you in the dark deliberately, to protect you. But I should have seen it, he insisted, pulling away. I should have asked more questions, dug deeper. I'm a financial professional, for God's sake. How could I have been so blind? Because you trusted your father, Thomas said quietly. We all did. The realization settled over us like a physical weight, that none of us had truly known Richard, that the man we had mourned, the legacy we had protected, was built on decades of criminal activity. There's something else, Richard Jr. said, his voice hollow. The records show transfers to a Swiss account in Catherine's name. Regular deposits, starting on her 18th birthday. What? I stared at him in disbelief. Catherine is involved? Not knowingly, he shook his head. The account was set up by Dad, with him as the signatory. She probably doesn't even know it exists. But it contains nearly $5 million of what appears to be Castellano money. The implications were staggering. Richard hadn't just endangered himself, or even me. He had entangled our children in his criminal web, perhaps irrevocably. We need to warn Catherine, I said urgently. If the Castellanos know about that account, she could be in danger. I'll try calling her again, Thomas said, reaching for his phone. She hasn't answered my texts. As he stepped outside to make the call, the cabin's thick log walls interfered with reception. Vivian moved to the laptop, studying the financial records with a professional eye. Richard was smarter than I gave him credit for, she said after a moment. The money isn't in one place. It's spread across dozens of accounts, each requiring different authentication methods. He built a maze. Can you navigate it? I asked, practicality overriding my lingering distrust. With time, yes, she nodded. But we need to move quickly. The Castellanos will be looking for these records and for us. They'll check every property connected to the Blackwood name. This place is registered to a shell corporation, Richard Jr. reminded her. It would take significant resources to trace it back to us. The Castellanos have significant resources, Vivian replied grimly. And they're highly motivated. I give us 3 days at most before they find this place. 3 days, I echoed, remembering the deadline Antonio Castellano had given Richard. The same amount of time they gave him. Poetic, isn't it? Vivian's smile was without humor. But unlike Richard, we have an advantage. We know they're coming. We can prepare. Thomas returned, his face tense. Catherine's not answering. I called Judith, and she says Catherine never arrived at her house. She hasn't heard from her at all. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Try Richard's house. Maybe she went there instead. Thomas dialed again, speaking briefly with Mrs. Fletcher, our housekeeper. When he hung up, his expression confirmed my fears. Mrs. Fletcher says 2 men came to the house this afternoon, asking for Catherine. They claimed to be friends of Dad's, said they had important information for the family. Catherine left with them about 3 hours ago and hasn't returned. Oh God, Claire whispered. They have her. We don't know that for certain, I said, trying to remain calm despite the panic clawing at my chest. She could be anywhere. With friends, with colleagues. Not answering her phone? Richard Jr. asked skeptically. After Thomas warned her to go to Judith's, to be careful? Call her office, I suggested, clutching at straws. Maybe she went to work, got busy. But calls to Catherine's office, her apartment, and her closest friends yielded nothing. My daughter had vanished after leaving the family home with two unidentified men. This is a message, Vivian said quietly. They're showing us they can reach any of us, at any time. That none of us is beyond their reach. We have to find her, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We have to get her back. And we will, Vivian assured me. But first, we need leverage. We need the money, and we need a plan. Through the long night that followed, we worked in shifts, Vivian and Richard Jr. tracing the hidden funds, Thomas and I searching for any clue to Catherine's whereabouts, Claire keeping watch from the cabin's wide windows, alert for any sign of approach. By dawn, exhaustion had settled over us all, but we had made progress. Vivian had located nearly 20 million of the missing funds, scattered across accounts in Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. Richard Jr. had discovered a pattern to his father's security measures. Each account required a piece of personal information that only a family member would know. He built it this way deliberately, Richard Jr. realized, so that only we could access the full amount. It's like a puzzle, with each of us holding different pieces. Which means the Castellanos need us alive, at least until they get all the money, Thomas pointed out. And Catherine? I asked, the fear for my daughter never leaving me. What does that mean for her? It means they won't hurt her, Vivian said with more confidence than I felt. Not until they get what they want. She's leverage, a bargaining chip. So we use their own tactics against them, Richard Jr. suggested. We offer a trade, Catherine for the evidence. And the money? Vivian asked pointedly. They want that too, Richard. They won't settle for just the evidence. We can't give them $30 million, Claire protested. It's blood money, criminal funds. It was never ours to begin with, I said quietly. If it means getting Catherine back safely, I would give them every cent. It's not that simple, Vivian warned. Even if we return the money, we've seen the evidence. We know too much. They'll have no reason to let any of us live once they have what they want. So, what do you suggest? I asked, frustration edging my voice. We can't just leave Catherine in their hands. We don't, she assured me. But we approach this strategically. We contact them, offer to negotiate. We buy time while we continue to build our leverage. What leverage? Thomas demanded. We have the evidence and some of the money. What else do we need? Protection, Vivian said simply. Legitimate, official protection that even the Castellanos won't risk crossing. The FBI, Richard Jr. nodded slowly. We go to them with the evidence, turn state's witness. Not all of us. Vivian shook her head. Just one as insurance. The rest remain free to negotiate Catherine's release. If anything happens to any of us, the FBI gets everything. It was a dangerous game she was proposing, a high-stakes balance of threat and counter-threat, with my daughter's life hanging in the balance. But as I looked around at the weary, determined faces of my family, at the evidence of Richard's double life spread across the cabin, I knew we had no choice. I'll do it, Claire volunteered unexpectedly. I'll take copies of the evidence to the FBI. I'm the only one not directly connected to the financial records. They'll have less reason to hold me. It's too dangerous, I protested. Claire, these people are killers. If they find out, they won't, she said with unexpected firmness. I'll be careful. And it makes the most sense, Eleanor. You need to be here, coordinating Catherine's rescue. Your sons need to help access the accounts. And her, she nodded toward Vivian. You need for her knowledge of the organization. That leaves me. I wanted to argue further, but the logic was undeniable. Claire was the least valuable to the Castellanos, the most expendable in their eyes. And she was right. We needed her as our insurance policy, our ace in the hole if negotiations failed. All right, I agreed reluctantly. But you don't go alone. Thomas will drive you to Albany, see you safely to the FBI field office there. Then he'll return here. What about contacting the Castellanos? Richard Jr. asked. How do we even reach them? Leave that to me, Vivian said. I know how to send a message that will reach Antonio directly. But first, we need to prepare. They'll want proof we have the money and the evidence before they'll even discuss Catherine. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Thomas and Claire prepared to leave for Albany, taking copies of the most incriminating evidence on a new flash drive purchased during our supply run. Vivian and Richard Jr. continued working on accessing the hidden accounts, building a complete picture of where the money had gone and how to retrieve it. And I found myself in Richard's study, surrounded by the remnants of his secret life, trying to understand the man I had been married to for nearly 3 decades. Had any of it been real? The love he had professed, the family we had built, the life we had shared? Or had it all been a carefully constructed facade, a cover for his criminal activities? Among his papers, I found a small leather journal I hadn't noticed before. Opening it, I recognized Richard's handwriting, not the meticulous notes of his business records, but personal reflections, private thoughts. I hesitated, then began to read, feeling like an intruder in my own husband's mind, yet desperate for some understanding, some explanation of how we had arrived at this point. The entries dated back years, sporadic reflections on business deals, family events, and increasingly, his relationship with Vivian. Reading his private thoughts about their affair was painful, but not in the way I had expected. There was desire there, certainly, but also calculation, a strategic assessment of her value to his operations. V provides access to C, networks previously closed to me. One entry noted clinically. Her background in financial systems makes her valuable beyond the personal connection. Must ensure she remains loyal. Vivian hadn't been just a mistress, an indulgence of middle-aged vanity. She had been a business asset, a connection to the criminal world Richard had increasingly inhabited. But as I read further, the tone of the entries changed. The calculated assessment gave way to something more complex, more human. E deserves better than the life I've given her. An entry from 2 years ago read, the constant deception, the risk I've placed on her and the children without their knowledge. If I could start again, make different choices, but it's too late for that now. I'm in too deep, and the only way out is forward. The final entry, dated the day before his death, chilled me to the bone. A knows about the skimming. 3 days to return funds I no longer have full access to. V suggests running, but where could we go that they wouldn't find us? Better to face this head-on, use the leverage I've built. The evidence goes to the authorities if anything happens to me or the family. E, and the children will be provided for through the legitimate holdings. It ends here, one way or another. He had known. He had known he was in danger, had anticipated the possibility of his death. And he had tried, in his way, to protect us, not by confessing, not by bringing us into his confidence, but by creating an elaborate safety net of evidence and hidden funds. A safety net that had failed to catch us when we needed it most. Eleanor. Vivian's voice startled me from my thoughts. She stood in the doorway of the study, watching me with an unreadable expression. Thomas and Claire are ready to leave. I closed the journal and rose, following her to the main room where my sister and youngest son were preparing for their journey. Claire looked pale but determined, the flash drive securely hidden in a locket around her neck. Be careful. I embraced her tightly. Go straight to the FBI, tell them everything. Make sure they understand the danger. I will, she promised. And Eleanor, we're going to get through this. We're going to get Catherine back. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Thomas hugged me next, his strong arms reminding me of when he was a boy, seeking comfort after a nightmare. I'll be back by nightfall, he assured me. 6 hours, round trip. Then we'll contact the Castellanos, begin negotiations. After they left, the cabin seemed emptier, the silence more oppressive. Richard Jr. returned to the laptop, continuing his methodical tracking of the hidden funds. Vivian moved to the window, scanning the surrounding forest with the alertness of a hunted animal. You knew, didn't you? I asked her, the journal's revelations still fresh in my mind. You knew he was in danger. That's why you warned him. She turned from the window, her expression careful. I knew the Castellanos had noticed the discrepancies. I tried to convince Richard to return the money, to make amends. He refused, because he no longer had access to all of it, I said, understanding dawning. He had hidden it too well, compartmentalized it in accounts that required family authentication. Yes, she nodded. A precaution that made sense at the time, but ultimately backed him into a corner. When Antonio demanded full repayment, Richard couldn't comply. Not completely. So they killed him, I said flatly. And now they have my daughter. They haven't harmed her, Vivian said with a confidence I wanted desperately to believe. They need her, need us, to access the full amount. It's a negotiation, Eleanor. A business transaction. My daughter's life is not a business transaction, I replied, anger flaring. And I will not treat it as such. That's exactly how you need to treat it, she countered. Emotional responses will get her killed. Cold calculation, strategic thinking, that's what will save her. Before I could respond, Richard Jr. called from the dining table, his voice tense with excitement. I've found it. The master list. Every account, every authentication method, every last cent. We joined him at the laptop, where a spreadsheet displayed an intricate financial web, accounts nested within accounts, funds moved through a dizzying array of shell corporations and holding companies. $32,400,000, Richard Jr. said, pointing to the total at the bottom. Plus interest accrued since Dad's death. It's all here, all traceable. We can access nearly all of it with the information we have. Nearly all? I questioned. There's one account we can't crack, he admitted. A Swiss-numbered account with approximately 8 million. The authentication requires a password we don't have. Let me see. Vivian leaned over his shoulder, studying the screen. After a moment, she straightened, a strange expression crossing her face. I know that account. It was our escape fund, Richard's and mine. The money that would have financed our new lives. You know the password? Richard Jr. asked skeptically. I do, she nodded. But that account wasn't part of the skimming operation. It was funded legitimately, through Richard's personal holdings. It shouldn't be included in the repayment. Tell that to the Castellanos, Richard Jr. said dryly. I doubt they're interested in the fine distinctions of which accounts Richard stole from them and which he didn't. That account was meant for me, Vivian insisted, an edge entering her voice. Richard promised it to me, a clean break, a new start. And now it may help save my daughter's life, I reminded her. All the money, every last cent, goes toward securing Catherine's release. There is no negotiation on that point. She held my gaze for a long moment, something complicated passing through her eyes. Calculation, resignation, perhaps even understanding. Finally, she nodded. The password is Persephone 1956, she said quietly. It was Richard's pet name for me, combined with the year his father founded the business. He thought it poetic, the queen of the underworld and the beginning of the Blackwood Empire. Richard Jr. entered the password and the final account opened, revealing the promised 8 million. With this, we had access to the entire sum Richard had skimmed from the Castellanos over the years. Now we can negotiate from strength, he said with grim satisfaction. Full repayment in exchange for Catherine and our safety. It won't be that simple, Vivian warned. The money is only part of what they want. The evidence is the greater threat to them. Then we offer a trade, I decided. All copies of the evidence and full repayment of the funds, in exchange for Catherine and guaranteed safety for all of us. They'll never agree to that. Vivian shook her head. Not without assurances that we haven't kept copies, that we haven't already gone to the authorities. But we have, Richard Jr. pointed out. Claire is on her way to the FBI right now. They don't know that, I said slowly, an idea forming. And they don't need to. Not until Catherine is safely returned to us. What are you suggesting? Vivian asked, studying my face. We lie, I said simply. We tell them we have all the evidence, that no copies have been made, that we're willing to trade everything for Catherine and our safety. Once she's back with us, once we're secure, then Claire's insurance policy comes into play. It's risky, Richard Jr. warned. If they discover the deception, it's all risky. I cut him off. Every option, every path forward carries danger. But this gives us the best chance of getting Catherine back alive. Vivian considered this, then nodded slowly. It could work. The Castellanos respect leverage, understand negotiation. If they believe we're offering complete capitulation, they might agree to the exchange. How do we contact them? I asked. There's a protocol, she explained. A way to reach Antonio securely. I'll need a disposable phone, one that can't be traced back to us. Richard Jr. produced a basic prepaid phone he had purchased during our supply run, handing it to Vivian. Will this work? She nodded, taking the phone and moving to the porch for better reception. Through the window, I watched as she dialed a number from memory, spoke briefly, then hung up. She repeated this process 3 times, each call seemingly to a different number, each conversation brief and coded. When she returned inside, her expression was grim but satisfied. It's done. The message will reach Antonio within the hour. If he's interested in negotiating, we'll receive a call back on this phone. And if he's not, Richard Jr. asked the question I couldn't bring myself to voice. Then we implement Plan B, Vivian replied. Claire delivers everything to the FBI, and we hope they can find Catherine before the Castellanos realize they have nothing left to lose. The hours that followed were among the most agonizing of my life. We sat in tense silence, the disposable phone on the table between us, waiting for a call that would determine my daughter's fate. Outside, the afternoon sun began its slow descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Thomas returned as promised, reporting that Claire had reached the FBI office safely and was already being debriefed by agents specializing in organized crime. The knowledge that our insurance policy was in place provided some comfort, but did nothing to ease the knot of fear in my stomach when I thought of Catherine in the hands of killers. At precisely 6 o'clock, the phone rang. Vivian answered, her voice calm and professional. Yes. A pause. I understand. Another pause. We'll be there. She hung up, meeting our anxious gazes. Antonio will meet with us. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., at the Westlake Marina. Neutral ground. We bring proof of the funds and all evidence. He brings Catherine. Just like that. Richard Jr. asked suspiciously. He's willing to negotiate? He's willing to listen, Vivian corrected. The negotiation happens face to face. But he's interested, which means Catherine is alive and unharmed. Relief flooded through me, though I knew we were far from safe. Did he agree to our terms? Full immunity for all of us. That's what we'll discuss tomorrow, she replied. But he didn't reject the possibility outright, which is promising. It could be a trap, Thomas pointed out. They could be planning to eliminate all of us at once, take the evidence and the money by force. Antonio doesn't operate that way. Vivian shook her head. He's brutal when crossed, but he's also a businessman. If he can achieve his objectives through negotiation rather than violence, he will. It's cleaner, attracts less attention. So we go, I said decisively. All of us. Show strength in numbers. Not all, Richard Jr. cautioned. Someone should stay behind, maintain contact with Claire, be ready to implement Plan B if things go wrong. I'll stay, Thomas volunteered. I'm the least familiar with the financial aspects, the least valuable in a negotiation. I wanted to protest, to keep my youngest child as far from danger as possible, but the logic was sound. Thomas was the most expendable in the Castellanos' eyes, the least knowledgeable about Richard's operations. All right, I agreed reluctantly. Richard Jr., Vivian, and I will meet with Antonio. Thomas stays here, maintains contact with Claire and the FBI. As night fell, we made our final preparations. Richard Jr. compiled the financial records, organizing them for presentation. Vivian coached us on negotiation tactics, on reading Antonio's signals, on presenting a united front despite our internal divisions. And I found myself once again in Richard's study, drawn to the leather journal that had offered glimpses into my husband's mind. Opening it to the final pages, I searched for any clue, any insight that might help us navigate the dangerous waters ahead. The last entry, written the night before his death, contained a line I had overlooked in my initial reading. If the worst happens, the key is in the place where we began. E will understand, if she remembers. The place where we began. What could Richard have meant? Our first home? The place we met? The start of Blackwood Industries? And then it hit me, the lake house. The very place where Vivian and I had fled from the gunman, where this nightmare had truly begun to unfold. Richard and I had met at a lakeside party 30 years ago, had our first kiss on that very shore. The place where we began. I whispered to myself. Of course. But what key had Richard hidden there? A literal key, or something metaphorical? And why would he think I would understand, when he had kept so much from me for so long? The questions circled in my mind as I rejoined the others in the main room, where the atmosphere was tense with anticipation and fear. Tomorrow we would face Antonio Castellano, the man who had likely ordered my husband's death, who now held my daughter hostage. We would negotiate for our lives, for our future, with the very evidence that could destroy us all. As I looked at the faces around me, Richard Jr., exhausted but determined, Thomas, afraid but steadfast, and Vivian, the woman I had hated for so long, now an unlikely ally in our desperate fight for survival, I realized how completely my world had changed since that moment in my dining room when I had walked in to find Vivian declaring, "This is my house now." In the space of a few days, I had gone from grieving widow to avenging ghost to fugitive negotiator, bargaining with criminals for my daughter's life. The comfortable certainties of my existence had been stripped away, revealing a truth I had never wanted to face, that the foundation of my life had been built on lies, on criminal enterprise, on moral compromise. Yet amid the fear and uncertainty, I felt something unexpected stirring within me, a fierce determination, a clarity of purpose that transcended the shock and betrayal. Whatever Richard had been, whatever he had done, I was still Eleanor Blackwood. Still a mother who would move heaven and earth to protect her children. Still a woman who had faced humiliation and emerged stronger. And tomorrow, I would face the man who had destroyed my husband and threatened my family. I would negotiate with the devil himself, if that's what it took to bring Catherine home safely. As we finalized our preparations, a subtle change in the atmosphere made me glance toward the window. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season were beginning to fall, dusting the dark pines with white, transforming the landscape into something new and unfamiliar. A fitting metaphor, I thought, for the transformation we were all undergoing, a cleansing, a covering of what had been, a blank slate on which our future would be written. Whether that future included any of us remained to be seen. Morning brought 6 inches of fresh snow and a crystalline clarity to the mountain air. We rose before dawn, preparing for the journey back to Westlake and the confrontation that awaited us. Remember, Vivian instructed as we loaded the SUV with our evidence and electronic banking access. Antonio responds to strength, not weakness. Show no fear, make no apologies. This is a business transaction, nothing more. A business transaction involving my daughter's life, I reminded her sharply. All the more reason to approach it with clear-headed determination, she replied. Emotional displays will only convince him you're weak, manipulable. Richard Jr. emerged from the cabin, carrying the laptop and the final flash drive containing all the evidence not already in the FBI's possession. Everything's ready. If we leave now, we'll reach the marina with time to spare. I embraced Thomas, who would remain at the cabin, maintaining our lifeline to Claire and the FBI. Be careful, I whispered. If anything goes wrong, if you don't hear from us by noon, I know, he cut me off gently. Implement Plan B. Claire releases everything to the FBI and they move in. The drive back to Westlake was tense and largely silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts, our own fears. The snowy landscape glided past, pristine and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil within the vehicle. As we approached the outskirts of town, Vivian broke the silence. There will be at least 4 of Antonio's men at the meeting, not counting whatever security detail he brings. They'll be armed. We won't be. Remember that. Will they hurt Catherine? I asked, the question that had haunted me through the sleepless night. Not if the negotiation proceeds as planned, she replied, which was no real answer at all. The Westlake Marina was deserted when we arrived, the early hour and winter weather ensuring privacy. A few boats remained in the water, covered for the season, but most had been dry-docked in the large warehouse at the end of the main pier. There, Richard Jr. pointed to a sleek black SUV parked near the harbormaster's office. That's Antonio's vehicle. And those? Vivian nodded toward two more vehicles positioned at strategic points around the marina, are his security. We're being watched from the moment we arrived. We parked beside Antonio's SUV and waited, the engine idling to keep the heater running against the morning chill. After precisely 5 minutes, a power play, Vivian explained in a whisper, a figure emerged from the harbormaster's office and gestured for us to join him. That's Ramirez. Vivian identified him. Antonio's right hand. If he's here, this is serious. We exited our vehicle, Richard Jr. carrying the laptop in a secure case, Vivian holding the flash drive in her coat pocket, me empty-handed but perhaps carrying the heaviest burden of all, the desperate hope of seeing my daughter alive and unharmed. Ramirez led us into the harbormaster's office, which had been cleared of its usual occupant. Inside, seated behind the desk as if it were his own office, was Antonio Castellano, a distinguished man in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a cashmere overcoat, his face bearing the lines of authority rather than age. Mrs. Blackwood. He rose slightly, a gesture of minimal courtesy. I must say, you've caused quite a stir. First dying, then returning, then fleeing with evidence that doesn't belong to you. Where is my daughter? I asked, ignoring his opener. Antonio's smile never reached his eyes.
Direct.
I appreciate that. Your daughter is safe, for now. Her continued safety depends on the outcome of our discussion. We want proof she's alive and unharmed, Richard Jr. demanded. Before we discuss anything. Antonio nodded to Ramirez, who produced a tablet and tapped the screen. A video call connected, showing Catherine seated in what appeared to be a hotel room, a newspaper dated that morning visible beside her. Mother? Her voice was steady, though fear showed in her eyes. What's happening? These men say you're in some kind of trouble that Dad was involved with. Ramirez cut the connection. Satisfied, I nodded, relief washing through me at seeing Catherine alive, at hearing her voice. We have what you want, I said to Antonio. All the funds Richard redirected. All the evidence he collected. In exchange for Catherine's safe return and our family's security. A fair opening offer. Antonio inclined his head. But incomplete. I also require assurances that no copies of the evidence have been distributed, that no authorities have been contacted. You have my word, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. He studied me, then laughed softly. The word of a woman who faked her own death. Forgive me if I require more substantive guarantees. The funds are the guarantee, Richard Jr. interjected, placing the laptop on the desk and opening it to display the accounts we had accessed. $32,400,000 plus accrued interest. Full repayment of everything my father took, accessible with the authentication codes we possess. Antonio leaned forward, examining the screen with the careful attention of a man accustomed to financial details. And the evidence? Vivian stepped forward, placing the flash drive on the desk. Everything Richard recorded. All the surveillance photos, the meeting notes, the audio files. The complete record. And this is the only copy? Antonio asked, his tone making it clear he didn't believe it. The only copy not in this room. I confirmed carefully, a half-truth that would have to suffice. Antonio leaned back, assessing us with the cold calculation of a predator. You understand my position. Richard betrayed my trust, stole from me, threatened me with exposure. By rights, his entire family should pay for that betrayal. Richard is dead, I pointed out. Possibly by your hand. Hasn't there been enough payment? His death was convenient, Antonio allowed, neither confirming nor denying involvement. But it didn't resolve the financial discrepancy, nor secure the evidence he had accumulated. Those matters remain outstanding. And we're offering resolution, Richard Jr. said. Complete repayment, all evidence returned, in exchange for Catherine's release and our family's safety. A clean slate, Antonio mused. As if none of this ever happened. Exactly, I nodded. You get what you want, we get what we want. Business concluded. He smiled thinly. There's still the matter of consequence. Richard betrayed me. There must be acknowledgement of that. Payment beyond mere restitution. My heart sank. What kind of payment? The Blackwood business interests, he said simply. Transferred to my organization. A fitting penalty, wouldn't you agree? The very vehicle Richard used to betray me, now serving my interests. That's outrageous, Richard Jr. protested. The legitimate business has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, Antonio countered. It has everything to do with this. Without the legitimate facade, none of Richard's activities would have been possible. The business is part of the debt. I felt the negotiations slipping away from us, the price for Catherine's safety rising beyond what we had anticipated. But before I could respond, Vivian spoke up. That wasn't the agreement, Antonio, she said, her voice cool and professional. Richard's debt was financial and informational, not structural. Demanding the business exceeds fair compensation. Antonio's gaze shifted to her, something dangerous flickering in his eyes. Vivian, always the voice of reason. Tell me, was betraying me part of your assignment, or did you develop that talent independently? I fulfilled my assignment, she replied evenly. Monitoring Richard's activities, reporting discrepancies. What happened after was personal. Yes, I heard about your planned disappearance, he nodded. The two of you running away with my money. Very romantic. Very foolish. Ancient history. Vivian dismissed it. We're here to resolve the present situation. The Blackwood business remains independent. The family retains control. That's non-negotiable. I glanced at her, surprised by her defense of our interests. Was this part of some deeper strategy, or had her priorities genuinely shifted? Antonio studied her, then shifted his attention to me. Your husband's mistress drives a hard bargain on your behalf, Mrs. Blackwood. One might almost think you were allies rather than enemies. Circumstances create strange partnerships, I replied. And she's right. The business stays with the family. That's our final position. He considered this, tapping his fingers lightly on the desk. Perhaps a compromise, then. The business remains nominally under Blackwood control, but with certain oversight provisions. A seat on the board for my representative. Transparency in all financial operations. A consulting fee paid quarterly to my organization. In other words, a legitimate front for continued criminal activity. The very role Richard had played, now being offered to us. No, I said firmly. Complete separation. The money and evidence for Catherine and our safety. Nothing more. Antonio's expression hardened. You're not in a position to dictate terms, Mrs. Blackwood. Your daughter's life hangs in the balance. As does your freedom, I countered, playing my final card. Do you think we came here without insurance? That we would place ourselves entirely at your mercy? His eyes narrowed. Explain. If anything happens to any of us, if Catherine isn't released unharmed, if our family faces any further threat, everything goes to the authorities. Everything, Antonio. Not just the evidence in that drive, but corroborating testimony, financial records, the complete history of your operation. You're bluffing, he said, but uncertainty had entered his voice. Am I? I held his gaze. Are you willing to take that risk? To gamble your entire organization on the chance that we haven't secured insurance against exactly this scenario? A tense silence fell over the room. Ramirez shifted slightly, his hand moving toward his jacket, where a weapon was undoubtedly concealed. Richard Jr. tensed beside me, preparing for what? We were unarmed, outmatched. But Antonio raised a hand, stopping whatever Ramirez had been contemplating. You surprise me, Mrs. Blackwood. Richard never mentioned your strategic thinking. Richard never knew me as well as he thought he did, I replied. None of you did. Another silence, this one contemplative rather than threatening. Finally, Antonio nodded once, decisively. Very well. The original terms. Full repayment, all evidence surrendered, in exchange for Catherine's release and your family's safety. The business remains yours, untouched by my organization. Relief flooded through me, though I was careful not to show it. When will Catherine be released? Once the funds are transferred and the evidence verified, he replied. A matter of hours, not days. We'll need confirmation of the transfers from our bank, Richard Jr. said. Verification that the accounts have been emptied as agreed. Of course, Antonio nodded. Ramirez will handle the technical details with you, Mrs. Blackwood, and I will discuss the broader terms of our disengagement. Richard Jr. glanced at me, concern evident in his eyes. I nodded reassuringly, though my heart was racing at the prospect of being separated from him. Go ahead. The sooner the transfers are verified, the sooner Catherine comes home. As Richard Jr. and Ramirez moved to a separate table with the laptop, Antonio gestured for me to take the seat opposite him. Vivian remained standing, positioned slightly behind me, a presence I found oddly comforting in that moment. You've shown unexpected steel, Mrs. Blackwood, Antonio said, his tone almost approving. It's a quality I might have utilized had circumstances been different. I'm not interested in your approval or your employment, I replied coolly. Only in my family's safety. A mother's devotion, he nodded. I respect that. Family is everything in the end. It's why Richard's betrayal was so disappointing. We were like family, he and I, 15 years of trust, of mutual benefit. Until he started skimming from your accounts, I noted. A mistake born of greed, Antonio confirmed. One that could have been forgiven, had he come to me directly, acknowledged the error, made amends. Instead, he chose deception, threat, the accumulation of leverage against me. Unforgivable. And yet here we are, negotiating forgiveness, I observed. For his children, if not for him. Antonio's smile was thin but genuine. Pragmatism, Mrs. Blackwood. Your husband is beyond my reach. His legacy, however, remains in play. Better to resolve this cleanly than to perpetuate a blood feud that benefits neither of us. Then we understand each other, I said, relieved that his sense of business appeared to be overriding any desire for vengeance. I believe we do, he agreed. Though there is one loose end we haven't addressed. His gaze shifted to Vivian, standing silently behind me. The matter of divided loyalties. Vivian tensed, almost imperceptibly. My assignment ended with Richard's death, she said carefully. Whatever personal arrangements existed between us died with him. And yet here you are, Antonio pointed out. Negotiating on behalf of his wife, the very woman you were helping him betray. Curious, wouldn't you say? Self-preservation, Vivian replied with a shrug. My interests aligned with the Blackwoods in this instance. And after? Antonio pressed. When this is resolved, when Catherine is returned and the financial matters settled, where do your loyalties lie then, Vivian? With your former employers? With your lover's widow? Or perhaps, solely with yourself? The question hung in the air, loaded with implication. I found myself holding my breath, strangely invested in Vivian's answer despite our complicated history. My loyalty is to my future, she said finally. A future that requires distance from both the Castellanos and the Blackwoods. Once this is resolved, I intend to disappear. Permanently. Antonio nodded slowly. A wise choice. Though one wonders if Mrs. Blackwood will permit such a clean exit, given your history with her husband. Both men turned to me, waiting for my response. Would I allow Vivian to simply walk away, after everything she had done? After the years of humiliation, the destruction of my marriage, the role she had played in entangling Richard with the Castellanos? A week ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal no. I would have demanded justice, retribution, some payment for the pain she had caused. But now, after everything we had endured together, after seeing her risk her life for my family, Vivian's future is her own concern, I said finally. Once Catherine is safe, once my family is secure, what she does is of no interest to me. Something like relief flickered across Vivian's face, quickly masked. Antonio, however, looked almost disappointed, as if he had hoped for more drama, more conflict between us. How magnanimous, he murmured. Though I wonder if you would be so generous if you knew everything she had done, everything she had been to your husband. I know enough, I replied, refusing to be baited. The past is dead. I'm concerned only with the future. Before Antonio could respond, Ramirez approached from the other table, nodding to his employer. The transfers are initiated. Verification codes match. The funds are moving as agreed. Excellent. Antonio smiled, the tension of the moment broken. And the evidence? Being verified now, Ramirez confirmed. Preliminary examination confirms it matches what we expected. Then we are making progress. Antonio turned back to me. Your daughter will be released within the hour, once final verification is complete. A car will bring her to your sister's home, where I understand you have been staying. I nodded, surprised by his knowledge of our movements, but not entirely shocked. The Castellanos intelligence network was clearly extensive. And our safety? I pressed. I want your word that this ends here. No retaliation, no further contact with my family. You have it, Antonio said solemnly. Provided, of course, that your insurance policy remains inactive. Any release of information to authorities would necessarily void our agreement. Understood. I agreed, knowing that Claire had already provided that information to the FBI, but confident that they would move only if we failed to return as planned. Richard Jr. joined us, his expression cautiously optimistic. The transfers are complete. All accounts emptied as agreed. Then our business is concluded. Antonio rose, extending his hand first to Richard Jr., then, after a moment's hesitation, to me. A pleasure doing business with the Blackwood family one final time. I accepted his hand briefly, trying not to think about whether these same hands had ordered my husband's death, had signed my daughter's abduction. Final is the operative word, Mr. Castellano. I trust we will never meet again. That, he smiled thinly, is entirely up to you. As we prepared to leave, Antonio spoke once more, his voice carrying a warning edge. Remember, Mrs. Blackwood, this resolution depends on your discretion. Any attempt to involve authorities to pursue justice for perceived wrongs would have unfortunate consequences for all concerned. I understand perfectly, I assured him, meeting his gaze without flinching. What's done is done. We all move forward. With that, we exited the harbormaster's office, walking back to our vehicle through the light snow that had begun to fall again. None of us spoke until we were inside, doors locked, engine running. Did we just? Richard Jr. began, his voice unsteady. Make a deal with the devil? I finished for him.
Yes.
But we got what we came for. Catherine will be released. We keep the business. We move on with our lives. You think it's that simple? Vivian asked from the back seat. That Antonio will just let us walk away? No, I admitted. But we've bought time, space to maneuver. And we have insurance he doesn't know about. Claire, Richard Jr. nodded.
The FBI.
Who won't move unless we fail to check in, I reminded him. Which means we need to get to Claire's house, meet Catherine, and confirm our safety before noon. As we drove away from the marina, I kept expecting gunshots, pursuers, some sign that Antonio had decided to eliminate us despite our agreement. But the streets remained quiet, the winter morning peaceful as Westlake began to stir for the day. I never thought we'd actually pull it off, Richard Jr. said quietly as we approached Claire's neighborhood. That we'd get Catherine back, keep the business, walk away from all of this. We haven't walked away yet, Vivian cautioned from the back seat. Not until Catherine is safely home. Not until we're certain Antonio will honor his word. Why would he risk breaking it? I asked. He has what he wants. The money, the evidence. Pursuing us further would only invite the very exposure he fears. Antonio is proud, Vivian replied. Proud men don't like being outmaneuvered, especially by women. Just be vigilant. This isn't over until it's over. As we pulled up to Claire's house, I saw no sign of Catherine or the car that was supposed to deliver her. My heart sank, fear rising that Antonio had lied, that the negotiation had been a sham. They said within the hour, Richard Jr. reminded me, seeing my expression. It's only been 30 minutes. We entered the house, finding it empty. Claire was still with the FBI in Albany, Thomas still at the cabin in the mountains. The silence was oppressive, the waiting unbearable. I should call Thomas, I said, reaching for the phone. Let him know the negotiation was successful, that Catherine is being released. But before I could dial, a text message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. Check the backyard. I froze, showing the message to Richard Jr. and Vivian. It could be a trap, Richard Jr. warned. Or it could be Catherine, I countered, already moving toward the back door. Vivian caught my arm. Let me go first. If it's a trap, better me than you. The unexpected offer surprised me, but I nodded, allowing her to step onto the back porch ahead of me. She scanned the snow-covered yard, then gestured for me to join her. There, standing in the center of the yard, looking cold and frightened but very much alive, was Catherine. Mother, she called, her voice breaking. Is that really you? I ran to her, enveloping her in my arms, feeling her trembling body against mine. It's me, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're home. Richard Jr. joined us, wrapping his arms around both of us, forming a tight circle of family in the snow. For a moment, everything else faded away. The danger, the betrayal, the negotiation with criminals. All that mattered was that my daughter was alive, safe in my arms. When we finally broke apart, I saw Vivian standing on the porch, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between longing and resignation. Our eyes met across the yard, and a silent understanding passed between us. Our unlikely alliance had served its purpose. Catherine was safe. The negotiation was complete. Whatever came next, whatever reckoning awaited between us, it would happen on different terms. As we led Catherine inside, warming her with blankets and hot tea, she began to tell us about her ordeal. The men who had come to the house claiming to be Richard's associates, the hotel room where she had been kept, the careful treatment she had received despite being a hostage. They kept saying they just wanted to talk to you, she explained, her hands still shaking slightly around her mug. That it was about Dad's business, about money he owed them. I didn't understand any of it. It's complicated, I said gently. And not something you need to worry about anymore. It's been resolved. But what was Dad involved in? She pressed, looking between Richard Jr. and me. These men, they weren't normal businessmen. The way they talked, the things they implied about Dad's activities. I exchanged a glance with Richard Jr., silently debating how much to tell her. How much did she need to know? How much would only burden her unnecessarily? Dad made some poor choices, Richard Jr. said finally. Got involved with people he shouldn't have. But it's over now. We've settled his debts, cleared the slate. Catherine looked unconvinced. They said he stole from them, that he was laundering money. Was that true? Again, I hesitated, torn between truth and protection. But hadn't secrecy, half-truths, and omissions been at the root of our current predicament? Hadn't Richard's compartmentalization, his careful segregation of knowledge, ultimately failed to protect any of us? Yes, I admitted softly. It was true. Your father was involved in illegal activities for many years. We didn't know, at least I didn't, until after his death. Catherine absorbed this, her face a study in conflicting emotions. And her, she nodded toward Vivian, who stood slightly apart from our family circle. What is she doing here? Wasn't she part of it all? She was, I confirmed. But she also helped us get you back safely. Our relationship with Vivian is complicated. That's one word for it, Catherine said bitterly. She moved into our house after your death, Mother. Wore your clothes, slept in your bed. And now she's what, an ally? Temporarily, Vivian spoke for the first time since Catherine's return. Once I'm certain Antonio will honor our agreement, I'll be gone. You'll never have to see me again. Catherine studied her, years of resentment visible in her expression. Just like that? You destroy our family and then walk away. I didn't destroy your family, Vivian replied calmly. Richard made his choices long before I entered the picture. I was a symptom, not the disease. The blunt assessment hung in the air between us all. Catherine looked ready to argue further, but I placed a gentle hand on her arm. It doesn't matter now, I said softly. What matters is that you're safe, that we're together, that we can move forward. How? She demanded. How do we just move forward after learning Dad was a criminal? After being kidnapped by mobsters? After everything that's happened? It was the question I had been asking myself since we first opened the safe deposit box, since we first discovered the truth about Richard's double life. How did we rebuild from here? How did we create a future untainted by the past? One day at a time, I said simply. Together, as a family. We learn from Richard's mistakes. We make different choices. We build something better. Catherine didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded, exhaustion beginning to overtake her. I just want to sleep, she murmured. In a real bed, without worrying about who might come through the door. Of course, I helped her to her feet. Use Claire's room. We'll be right here when you wake up. As Richard Jr. helped his sister upstairs, I found myself alone with Vivian for the first time since our desperate flight from the lake house. She stood by the window, watching the snow fall, her profile outlined against the winter light. What will you do now? I asked, surprising myself with the question, with the realization that I actually cared about the answer. She turned, a faint smile touching her lips. Disappear. Change my name, start fresh somewhere far from here. It's what I do best. Another identity, I mused. Another life. Don't you ever get tired of reinventing yourself? Sometimes, she admitted. But it's safer than staying, than allowing people to know the real you. Safer than attachment. Is that what happened with Richard? I found myself asking. You became attached, despite your better judgment. She was silent for a long moment, considering the question. Richard was different, she said finally. Smarter than most, more complex. He saw through the persona to the person beneath. For a while, it was freeing. To be seen, to be known. I thought I knew him too, I said softly. For 27 years, I thought I understood the man I had married. I was wrong. We were both wrong about him, Vivian acknowledged. He fooled us in different ways, but the deception was the same. He showed us what he wanted us to see, kept the rest hidden. Another silence fell between us, not entirely uncomfortable. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the world into something clean and new. Thank you, I said finally, for helping us get Catherine back. For standing with us against Antonio. You didn't have to do that. Self-interest, she shrugged, but the gesture lacked conviction. I needed your help as much as you needed mine. Nevertheless, I persisted. You could have made different choices. Betrayed us to Antonio, secured your own safety at our expense. You didn't. She met my gaze directly. Perhaps I wanted to prove I could be something other than what everyone believed me to be. The heartless seductress, the calculating manipulator. Perhaps I wanted to surprise myself. And did you? I asked. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I'm still deciding. Richard Jr. returned downstairs, interrupting whatever might have been said next. Catherine's asleep, he reported. Exhausted, but otherwise seems unharmed. We should call Thomas, I remembered. Let him know everything went as planned, that Catherine is safe. As Richard Jr. made the call, I found myself watching Vivian again. This enigmatic woman who had been my nemesis and my ally, who had shared my husband's bed and saved my daughter's life. Who was she, really? What lay beneath the carefully constructed exterior she presented to the world? I would likely never know. In a few hours, she would be gone, vanished into a new identity, a new life far from Westlake and the Blackwoods. Our paths, so violently entangled these past years, would diverge permanently. And I found, to my surprise, that the thought brought me no satisfaction.
No closure.
Only a strange, melancholy acceptance that some questions would remain forever unanswered, some wounds never fully healed. Thomas's voice came through the speakerphone, breaking into my thoughts. That's fantastic news about Catherine. I've already called Claire. She's with the FBI agents now, explaining that we've resolved the situation, that no intervention is necessary. Good, Richard Jr. nodded. The last thing we need is federal agents complicating things. Antonio upheld his end of the bargain. Catherine is home. We're safe. It's over. Not quite, I said suddenly, remembering the journal entry, the clue Richard had left. There's one more thing we need to do. What's that? Richard Jr. asked, frowning. The lake house, I explained. Richard left something there, something he thought I would understand. The key is in the place where we began. The key? Vivian looked up sharply. What key? I don't know, I admitted. But it must be important if he mentioned it in his final journal entry. If he thought I would need it if the worst happened. It could be nothing, Richard Jr. cautioned. Dad was under enormous stress, possibly not thinking clearly. Or it could be critical, Vivian countered. Richard was meticulous, strategic. If he left a clue, it matters. We should check, I decided. The lake house is only an hour from here. We can be there and back before dark. I'll stay with Catherine, Richard Jr. offered. In case she wakes up, in case anything happens. The implication was clear. In case Antonio decided to revoke our agreement, in case further danger emerged. I nodded, grateful for his protectiveness toward his sister. I'll go with you, Vivian said, surprising me again. You shouldn't go alone, not after everything that's happened. I wanted to refuse, to assert my independence, but practicality won out. The lake house had already been the site of one violent encounter. Better to have someone watching my back, even if that someone was Vivian Pierce. All right, I agreed. But this is the last thing. After this, our paths separate. She nodded, understanding the boundaries I was setting. The last thing, she echoed. A final resolution. As we prepared to leave, I checked on Catherine once more, finding her deeply asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since her return. Whatever Richard had hidden, whatever key awaited us at the lake house, I was determined it would not disrupt the fragile peace we had achieved, the tentative safety we had negotiated at such cost. Little did I know that the lake house held one final revelation, one last secret that would change everything I thought I understood about my husband, about Vivian, about the complex web of lies and truth that had entangled us all. A secret that would force me to make the most difficult choice of my life. The drive to the lake house was tense, the silence between Vivian and me filled with unspoken questions, unresolved conflicts. Snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something ethereal and strange, much like my own life had become, unrecognizable from what it had been just days ago. If you've stayed with me through this journey, hit subscribe now, because what I discovered at the lake house wasn't just the final piece of the puzzle. It was the match that would ignite everything I thought I knew about my husband, my rival, and myself. What do you think we'll find? Vivian asked, as we turned onto the narrow road leading to the lake. What kind of key would Richard have left? I don't know, I admitted. It could be literal, a key to another safe deposit box, another property. Or it could be metaphorical, information, leverage, something to protect us if the arrangement with Antonio fails. Richard was always thinking 3 moves ahead, she nodded. Setting contingencies, creating fail-safes. It's what made him such a valuable partner to the Castellanos and such a dangerous enemy when he turned on them. The casual way she spoke of my husband, the intimate knowledge of his thinking, still stung despite everything. For 15 years, Vivian had known a side of Richard the First had never seen, had shared thoughts and plans and secrets that had been kept from me. The betrayal still felt fresh, even amid the chaos of our current situation. You knew him well, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She glanced at me, something like understanding in her eyes. I knew a version of him, she corrected. The version he chose to show me, just as you knew the version he chose to show you. Neither of us knew the whole man. And does that comfort you? I asked. Knowing we were both deceived, both used in different ways? Comfort. She seemed to consider the word. No. But it provides perspective. Richard compartmentalized his life, his relationships. It was how he managed the contradictions, the conflicts between who he was and who he pretended to be. The insight was uncomfortably perceptive, echoing my own thoughts about the husband I had thought I knew. Had Richard been compartmentalizing from the beginning? Had our entire marriage been just one segment of a divided life? We lapsed back into silence as we approached the lake house, both of us scanning the surroundings for any sign of surveillance, any indication that Antonio had gone back on his word. But the property appeared deserted, the only tracks in the fresh snow belonging to small woodland creatures. "Wait," Vivian said as we prepared to exit the car. "Let me check first." She slipped out, moving with the silent efficiency I had come to associate with her, circling the perimeter of the house before returning to signal the all-clear. The precaution reminded me again of how different our worlds were, her life of calculated risks and constant vigilance, my life of suburban predictability now shattered beyond repair. Inside, the lake house was exactly as we had left it during our hasty escape, furniture slightly askew, a coffee cup still on the counter, my hasty note to my children on the dining table. It felt like years had passed since that night, though it had been less than a week. "Where would he have hidden it?" Vivian asked, surveying the main room. "This key, that was in the place where you began?" I thought back to Richard's journal entry, to the cryptic message he had left. The place where we began. Richard and I met at a party on this lake 30 years ago. Our first kiss was on the shore, just below the deck. It's where our relationship began. Vivian nodded, processing this. So the key could be hidden somewhere along the shoreline? Buried, perhaps? I shook my head, another memory surfacing. No, not outside. There's a loose floorboard on the deck, directly above the spot where we first kissed. Richard used to joke that it was our special place, that the house had marked it for us. We moved to the deck, brushing away the light covering of snow to reveal the weathered wooden planks beneath. I knelt, running my fingers along the boards until I found the one that had always been slightly raised, slightly off-kilter compared to its neighbors. "Here," I said, pressing on one end of the board. It lifted easily, revealing a small space beneath. And there, wrapped in waterproof material, was a slim metal box. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted it from its hiding place. Whatever Richard had concealed here, whatever he had believed important enough to leave this cryptic clue, was about to be revealed. We returned inside, placing the box on the dining table. It was locked, but the key, a literal key, small and silver, was taped to the bottom of the box itself. Richard's thoroughness again, ensuring I would have access when the time came. "Open it," Vivian urged, her usual composure betrayed by the tension in her voice. I inserted the key, turned it, and lifted the lid. Inside were several items: a flash drive, similar to the ones we had recovered from the safe deposit box, a handwritten letter in Richard's distinctive script, and a small leather pouch containing what appeared to be passport-sized documents. The letter first, I decided, unfolding the pages with careful hands. Richard's words, written in the last days of his life, filled the pages. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am gone. I hope you have found this message through the clue I left in my journal, that you remembered the significance of this place, of where we began. There is so much I need to tell you, so much I should have told you years ago. The truth about my business dealings, about Vivian, about the life I've been leading behind the facade of our marriage. You deserve the full truth, even if it comes too late for forgiveness. First, the practical matters. The flash drive contains evidence beyond what I've stored elsewhere: names, dates, transactions that implicate not just the Castellanos, but their associates in law enforcement, in government, in financial institutions across the country. It is the ultimate insurance policy, one that will guarantee your safety and that of our children if used correctly. The documents in the pouch are for you: a new identity, untraceable to the Blackwood name, with access to funds I've secured separately from both the Castellano money and our legitimate holdings. If necessary, if danger persists despite my precautions, use them. Disappear. Start fresh somewhere beyond their reach. Now, the harder truths. My relationship with Vivian began as a business arrangement, as I'm sure you've discovered by now. She was sent to monitor me, to ensure my loyalty to the Castellanos. What neither of us expected was that it would become something more, not love, exactly, but a connection born of shared secrets, shared dangers, shared ambitions. But there is something about Vivian that even she doesn't know, something I discovered only recently in my investigations. She is not who she believes herself to be. Her history, her background, The details are fabricated, constructed by the Castellanos to create the perfect operative. The truth is on the flash drive, in a file marked Persephone. I leave it to your judgment whether to share this information with her. It may be a kindness to let her continue in ignorance, or it may be the key to her own freedom. You will know better than I what is right. As for us, Eleanor, I can offer no excuses, no justifications that would ease the pain I've caused you. I entered our marriage with genuine affection, with hopes for a life together. The corruption came later, gradually, one compromise leading to another until I was too entangled to find my way back to the man you thought you had married. You deserved better than the husband I became. Our children deserved better than the father I was. All I can offer now is this final protection, this last attempt to secure your future from beyond the grave. Use what I've left you wisely. Trust no one completely. And know that, despite everything, a part of me always remained the man you met on the shores of this lake 30 years ago, the man who kissed you under the stars and believed in possibilities. With regret, with respect, with what love remains. Richard. I set the letter down, my vision blurred with unexpected tears. Even now, even after death, Richard was still revealing himself in fragments, still withholding as much as he disclosed. The letter offered apologies without full explanations, regrets without complete honesty. And yet, there was something in those words that touched me, a glimpse of the man I had loved, the man who had existed beneath the deceptions and betrayals. A recognition, however belated, of the pain he had caused. What does it say? Vivian asked, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I looked up at her, seeing her anew through the lens of Richard's revelations. What secrets about her identity had he discovered? What truth was concealed on that flash drive that even she didn't know? He left insurance, I said, choosing my words carefully. More evidence, more leverage against the Castellanos. And escape documents for me if needed. And, she pressed, knowing there must be more. And he wrote about you, I admitted. About how your relationship began as business but became something else. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, relief, perhaps, that Richard had acknowledged the reality of their connection. That's all. I hesitated, weighing Richard's advice against my own instincts. Did Vivian deserve to know whatever truth he had discovered about her? Or would it be, as he suggested, a kindness to let her continue in ignorance? Before I could decide, the sound of a car approaching disrupted our conversation. We both tensed, moving instinctively away from the windows. Were you followed? I whispered. No, she shook her head. I was watching. We were clean the entire way. We waited in silence as the vehicle drew closer, then stopped. Car doors opened and closed. Footsteps approached the house. Eleanor, a familiar voice called. Are you there? It's Claire. Relief flooded through me.
Claire.
Not Antonio's men, not some new threat, just my sister. I moved to the door, opening it to find Claire on the porch, accompanied by a man in a dark suit, clearly federal law enforcement. Claire. I embraced her quickly. What are you doing here? Who is this? Special Agent Daniel Morgan, FBI. The man introduced himself, showing his credentials. Your sister has been helping us understand the situation with the Castellanos. When she mentioned you were headed here, I thought it best to join her. I shot Claire a questioning look, silently asking whether she had revealed our deal with Antonio, whether she had compromised the safety we had negotiated at such cost. It's all right, she assured me. I've explained everything, the negotiation, Catherine's release, the agreement for our safety. Agent Morgan understands we're not looking for intervention, just insurance. Insurance we now have, I said, gesturing to the metal box on the table. Richard left additional evidence, more comprehensive than what we already had. Agent Morgan's eyes sharpened with interest. May I? He asked, moving toward the table. I hesitated, then nodded. The evidence was what it was, a record of criminal activity that implicated not just the Castellanos but apparently their connections in law enforcement and government. If we were truly to move forward, to build a new life free from the shadows of Richard's past, perhaps full disclosure was the only path. As Agent Morgan examined the flash drive, Vivian drew me aside, her voice low and urgent. Are you sure about this? Once the FBI has that evidence, we lose our leverage with Antonio. If he learns we've gone to the authorities despite our agreement. He won't, I assured her. Not if the FBI uses the information strategically, builds their case, without revealing their sources. Agent Morgan seems to understand the delicacy of our situation. She didn't look convinced, but before she could argue further, Agent Morgan rejoined us, his expression grave. Mrs. Blackwood, this evidence is extraordinary. Not just the Castellano operations, but corruption at the highest levels of several agencies, including my own. This could dismantle entire networks of organized crime and official complicity. I understand, I nodded. But our priority remains our family's safety. Any use of this evidence must protect that. Of course, he agreed. We can build our case carefully, protect your identities as sources. The Castellanos need never know you are involved. And our agreement with Antonio? I pressed. The safety we negotiated for Catherine's release? Remains intact, Agent Morgan assured me. The Bureau has no interest in jeopardizing your family. We'll proceed with utmost caution. I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity, his trustworthiness. After everything we had been through, after discovering the extent of corruption in systems I had once believed in, skepticism came naturally. There's something else, I said, making a decision. Something you should see. I opened the leather pouch, revealing the documents Richard had prepared. A new identity for me, complete with passport, driver's license, credit cards, and banking information. An escape route, a fresh start if everything else failed. He thought of everything, Claire murmured, examining the meticulous forgeries. Not just for me, I realized, searching deeper in the pouch. For all of us. There they were, similar documents for Richard Jr., Thomas, Catherine, even Claire. New identities, new beginnings, carefully crafted and ready for use if necessary. Richard had prepared escape routes for his entire family, a final protection against the dangers he had invited into our lives. But there was one more set of documents, one more identity that Richard had prepared. I pulled them out slowly, already suspecting what I would find. These are for you, I said to Vivian, handing her the papers. A new identity, a fresh start. Richard prepared it along with the others. She took the documents with visible shock, examining the passport with its unfamiliar name but her photograph. Why would he do this? Why include me in his family's escape plan? I thought of Richard's letter, of his cryptic references to truths about Vivian that even she didn't know. Perhaps he felt he owed you that much, I said carefully. A chance at freedom, just like the rest of us. Agent Morgan cleared his throat. Ms. Pierce, there's something you should know. The Bureau has been investigating your background as part of our Castellano case. We've discovered some discrepancies in your history. Vivian tensed, her hand instinctively moving toward where I suspected she kept her weapon. What kind of discrepancies? Your early life, he said carefully. The records don't match the story you've been told. According to our investigation, you were recruited by the Castellanos as a teenager, your original identity erased, replaced with the background they created for you. That's absurd. She dismissed it, but I could see doubt flickering in her eyes. I remember my childhood, my family. I know who I am. Do you? Agent Morgan asked gently. Or, do you know the narrative they constructed for you? The memories they helped shape through years of subtle manipulation. I thought of Richard's letter, of the file marked Persephone on the flash drive. This was the truth he had discovered, the secret he had left to my discretion to reveal. The file, I said softly. Richard found evidence of this too. It's on the drive, in a file with your code name. Vivian looked between us, her customary composure cracking for the first time since I had known her. This is a trick, she insisted. A way to turn me against the Castellanos, to make me a more cooperative witness. It's the truth, Agent Morgan said firmly. Your real name is Laura Chen. You were 15 when Antonio Castellano rescued you from a foster care situation and began grooming you as an operative. They erased Laura Chen and created Vivian Pierce, then Rebecca Winters, then Carolyn Lake, each identity building on the fiction they began with. Vivian, or Laura, sank into a chair, the documents clutched in her hands. "That's not possible," she whispered, but the conviction had left her voice. "I would know. I would remember." "Would you?" I asked gently. "If the deception began when you were just a child? If they became the only family you knew, the only structure in your life?" She looked up at me, vulnerability replacing her usual calculation. "Why would Richard keep this from me? If he knew, if he had evidence, why not tell me?" "Perhaps he was protecting you," I suggested, thinking of his letter. "Or perhaps he wasn't sure how you would react, whose side you would choose if forced to confront the truth." Agent Morgan stepped forward. "Miss Chen." "Don't call me that," she snapped. "That person doesn't exist anymore, if she ever did." "Vivian, then," he amended. "The Bureau can offer you protection, a new start, in exchange for your cooperation against the Castellanos. Your testimony, combined with this evidence, would be invaluable." She laughed bitterly. "Turn against the only family I've known, on the word of an FBI agent and a dead man's files? You understand what you're asking." "We're offering you a choice," I said quietly. "Something the Castellanos never gave you. A chance to decide who you are, what you want, based on the full truth." She fell silent, the weight of the revelation evident in her stillness, in the careful blankness of her expression. I could only imagine the turmoil beneath that controlled exterior, the questioning of every memory, every relationship, every choice she had made believing it was her own. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think, to process this." "Of course," Agent Morgan nodded. "But I should take the evidence now, begin securing it properly. The sooner we start building our case, the safer everyone will be." I handed him the flash drive, keeping Richard's letter for myself. That, at least, was personal, not evidence of crimes, but of a husband's final attempts at explanation, at protection. As Agent Morgan stepped outside to secure the drive in his vehicle, Claire moved to the kitchen to make coffee, leaving Vivian and me alone in the main room of the lake house. The silence between us was different now, less antagonistic, more contemplative, filled with the weight of revelations neither of us had anticipated. "Do you believe it?" she asked finally. "That my entire identity is a construction? That everything I remember about my life before the Castellanos is a lie?" "I believe Richard thought it was true," I replied carefully. "And he was thorough in his investigations, meticulous in his evidence gathering. If he documented this, he had reason to believe it." She nodded slowly, absorbing this. "All these years, I thought I was using them as much as they were using me, building leverage, creating my own power base within their organization. But if this is true, then they've been controlling you from the beginning," I finished softly. "Shaping you into exactly what they needed." "A perfect operative," she murmured. "Loyal because she believes she's chosen loyalty. Effective because she thinks she's acting in her own interests." The vulnerability in her voice stirred something unexpected in me, compassion, empathy for the woman who had been my rival, my nemesis, and now, perhaps, another victim of the same manipulation that had ensnared my husband. "What will you do?" I asked. She looked down at the forged documents in her hands, the new identity Richard had prepared for her, the escape route he had provided. "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my choices, it's all in question now." "You could start fresh," I suggested. "Use these documents, build a new life far from the Castellanos, from all of this." "Running away?" She raised an eyebrow, a flicker of her usual self showing through. "That doesn't sound like me. Or, at least, not like the me I thought I was." "Or you could stay," I found myself saying. "Help the FBI build their case. Find out the full truth about your past. Reclaim whatever was taken from you." She studied me, genuine curiosity in her expression. "Why would you suggest that? Why would you want me to stay, after everything that's happened between us?" It was a fair question, one I had been asking myself. Why did I care what happened to Vivian Pierce? Why did her newly revealed vulnerability affect me so deeply? Because I understand what it's like to have your entire reality questioned, I said slowly. To discover that the life you thought you were choosing was manipulated from the beginning. The Castellanos did that to both of us, in different ways. Perhaps that creates a kind of connection. Not friendship, she clarified, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. No, I agreed. Not that. But something human. A recognition of shared trauma, perhaps. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. I need to see the file, she decided. Richard's evidence about my past. I need to know exactly what he discovered, what led him to this conclusion. I'll speak to Agent Morgan, I promised. Make sure you have access to that information, whatever you decide to do next. Claire returned with coffee, followed by Agent Morgan. The four of us sat around the dining table, the metal box and its revelations between us, each processing what had been discovered, what it meant for our futures. I should get back to Westlake, I said finally. Check on Catherine, update Richard Jr. and Thomas on what we found. I'll drive you, Claire offered. Agent Morgan has more questions for me about the evidence I provided in Albany. I turned to Vivian, uncertain how to leave things between us. And you? She seemed to consider her options, weighing paths forward with the careful calculation I had come to associate with her. I'll stay here for now, she decided. I need space. To think. To decide. The documents. I gestured to the forged identity Richard had prepared for her. Will you use them? I don't know yet, she admitted. But thank you. For sharing them. For everything. It was an inadequate phrase for the complex exchange that had occurred between us, for the shifting dynamic that had transformed us from enemies to reluctant allies to something I couldn't quite define. Whatever you decide, I said, be careful. The Castellanos. I know them better than anyone, she finished for me. I'll be cautious. As Claire and I prepared to leave, Vivian stopped me at the door, her voice low enough that only I could hear. Eleanor. Richard's letter. Did it say anything else about me? Anything that might help me understand why? I thought of Richard's words, of his description of their connection, of his regret for the pain he had caused us both in different ways. He said your relationship became something more than business, I told her. Not love, exactly, but a connection. I think he cared for you in his way. She absorbed this, emotion flickering briefly across her face before the careful mask returned. Thank you for your honesty. It's the least we all deserve, I replied. After so many years of lies. The drive back to Westlake was quieter than the journey out, Claire respecting my need for silence, for processing all that had occurred. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine white landscape that seemed to mock the complexities of human deception with its simple purity. At Claire's house, I found Catherine awake, sitting with Richard Jr. and Thomas, who had returned from the cabin while we were gone. The relief on their faces at seeing me safe was palpable, a reminder of how quickly our family had adapted to danger, to the constant awareness of threat. Mom. Catherine rose to embrace me. What happened? Did you find something at the lake house? Yes, I confirmed, joining them at the kitchen table. Richard left additional evidence against the Castellanos, more comprehensive than what we already had. And I hesitated, uncertain how much to share about Vivian, about the revelations regarding her past. And Thomas prompted. And escape documents, I continued. New identities for all of us if we need to disappear. Richard prepared them as a last resort, a final protection. Always 3 moves ahead, Richard Jr. murmured, unconsciously echoing Vivian's earlier assessment of his father. Where's Vivian? Catherine asked, noticing her absence for the first time. She stayed at the lake house, I replied. She has decisions to make about her future. I saw no need to elaborate further, to burden my children with the complexities of Vivian's situation, with the revelation that she too had been manipulated, used by the same organization that had corrupted their father. The FBI has the evidence now, I continued. They'll build their case carefully, protect our identities as sources. Our agreement with Antonio should remain intact. He never needs to know we provided information. And if he finds out? Thomas asked, the practical question hanging heavy in the air. Then we have options, I said, thinking of the documents Richard had prepared, the escape routes he had established. But for now, we proceed as planned. We rebuild our lives, restore the legitimate parts of the business, move forward. As my children nodded, accepting this direction, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since discovering Richard's betrayal, since faking my own death and returning to find Vivian in my place, I felt a clear path forward. Not easy, not without complications, but possible. That evening, as we shared a quiet dinner in Claire's dining room, I looked around at my family, Catherine, still pale but recovering her spirit, Richard Jr., more somber, more thoughtful than before, Thomas, protective and watchful, Claire, steadfast and loving. We had been through fire together, had faced dangers I could never have imagined in my previous life as Eleanor Blackwood, respectable widow, pillar of Westlake society. We had emerged changed, hardened in some ways, more vulnerable in others. But we had emerged together, bound not just by blood, but by shared survival, by mutual protection when it mattered most. Later, after the others had gone to bed, I sat alone in Claire's darkened living room, Richard's letter in my hands. His final words, his attempt at explanation, at apology. Was it enough? Could any explanation suffice for the deceptions, the dangers, the manipulation he had subjected us to for decades?
No, I decided.
It wasn't enough. But it was all I would ever have, the only closure possible with a dead man. And perhaps that was fitting, that Richard's explanations, like his life, would remain incomplete, fragmentary, never fully revealing the whole truth of who he had been. My phone buzzed with a text message, an unknown number, but I knew instantly who it was from. Leaving tomorrow. Thank you for the truth, however painful. Take care of your family. I'll take care of the rest. Vivian or Laura, or whoever she truly was, making her choice, taking her path forward. I found myself hoping, unexpectedly, that she would find what she was seeking, that the truth about her past would lead to something like freedom, like peace. I didn't reply to the message. There was nothing left to say between us. No more negotiations. No more reluctant alliances. Our paths, so violently entangled for a time, were diverging again, each of us moving toward whatever future awaited. A week later, I returned to Blackwood Manor for the first time since my dramatic reappearance in the dining room, since the moment I had walked in to find Vivian declaring, "This is my house now." It felt different now, not just a house, a possession to be reclaimed, but a symbol of everything that had changed, everything that had been revealed. The elegant rooms, the valuable antiques, the carefully curated artwork, all purchased with money that had been, at least in part, tainted by Richard's criminal activities. Could we live here again? Could we rebuild our lives in a place so saturated with deception, with betrayal? As I wandered through the rooms, touching familiar surfaces, remembering moments both genuine and false, I came to a decision. Blackwood Manor would be sold, its proceeds used to establish a foundation in Richard's name, a way of channeling whatever legitimate wealth remained into something positive, something healing. We would move forward differently, more authentically, in a new home untainted by the past. Richard Jr. would lead the legitimate businesses, carefully separated from any hint of their former criminal connections. Thomas would pursue his own path, free from the shadow of the Blackwood name if he chose. Catherine would heal, would find her way forward stronger for having survived her ordeal. And I would become a different kind of Eleanor Blackwood, not the perfect wife, the gracious hostess, the silent sufferer of humiliations. Not even the avenging ghost who had returned from the dead to reclaim what was hers. But something new, something forged in the crucible of revelation and danger and hard-won truth. A woman who had faced the collapse of her world and built something new from the ruins. A woman who had negotiated with criminals, outmaneuvered enemies, protected her family at all costs. A woman who had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed, depths she had never been forced to plumb. 2 months after our confrontation with Antonio Castellano, the news broke. A massive federal operation against organized crime, dozens of arrests across multiple states, including high-ranking members of the Castellano organization. Antonio himself, according to the reports, had fled the country hours before the raids began, tipped off somehow despite the FBI's precautions. I wondered briefly if Vivian had warned him, if her loyalty to the man who had shaped her life had ultimately outweighed her newfound knowledge of his manipulation. But then I remembered her text, "I'll take care of the rest." Perhaps her warning had been calculated, a final move in a chess game I couldn't fully see. The arrests made no mention of the Blackwood family, of our connection to the Castellanos, of the evidence Richard had accumulated. Agent Morgan had kept his word, had protected our identities as sources. We were free to continue our lives, to rebuild without the shadow of public scandal. A year to the day after my dramatic return, after walking into my dining room to find Vivian declaring ownership of my home, I stood on the deck of a new house, smaller, less ostentatious than Blackwood Manor, but warm, welcoming. Mine in a way the manor had never truly been. My family gathered around me, Richard Jr., who had successfully transitioned the business to entirely legitimate operations, Thomas, pursuing a law degree with a focus on white-collar crime, Catherine, recovered from her ordeal and finding purpose in work with trauma survivors, Claire, my steadfast sister, now closer than ever after all we had endured together. As we raised our glasses in a toast to new beginnings, to survival, to truth, I thought of Richard's final words in his letter. "A part of me always remained the man you met on the shores of this lake 30 years ago, the man who kissed you under the stars and believed in possibilities." Perhaps that was true. Perhaps somewhere beneath the deceptions, the criminal entanglements, the double life, a part of him had remained that idealistic young man. I would never know for certain. But I knew who I was now, no longer defined by my relationship to Richard, no longer the woman whose identity had been Mrs. Blackwood for 27 years. I was Eleanor, complete in myself, shaped by betrayal and revelation, by danger and survival, by the unexpected connections formed in the crucible of crisis. As the evening deepened and my family drifted inside, I remained on the deck, looking out at the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Vivian was living her new life, navigating her own path forward with the truth Richard had uncovered. Somewhere, Antonio Castellano was in hiding, his empire crumbling, his power diminished. And here I stood, survivor of it all, architect of my own resurrection. The woman who had returned from the dead to reclaim not just her home, but her very self. "This is my life now," I whispered to the night, a quiet echo of the declaration that had once enraged me. But this time, the words were true. This life, this future, this strength, they were mine, hard-won and precious. And no one would ever take them from me again. 3 years after my return from the dead, I received a postcard from a small coastal town in Portugal. No message, no signature. Just a photograph of a sun-drenched cafe overlooking the Atlantic. But I knew who had sent it, knew it was Vivian's way of saying she had found her peace, had created the new life Richard's documents had made possible. I didn't reply, didn't try to trace her. Some connections are meant to be momentary, intense, but impermanent, like lightning illuminating a landscape before fading back to darkness. Vivian and I had shared such a connection. Enemies turned allies turned something more complex than either, and now our paths had diverged completely, as they were always meant to do. The Blackwood Foundation, established with the proceeds from the sale of the manor, was thriving, funding programs for at-risk youth, for women escaping domestic violence, for families rebuilding after trauma. A kind of atonement, perhaps, for the damage Richard's choices had caused, a redirection of tainted wealth toward healing. My children had found their ways forward, Richard Jr. leading the legitimate business with a transparency his father had never shown, Thomas using his legal expertise to help victims of financial crimes, Catherine working with trauma survivors, transforming her own experience into support for others. And I had found my own path, no longer defined by my role as wife, as widow, as victim or avenger. I had discovered strengths I never knew I possessed, depths I had never been forced to plumb. I had faced the collapse of everything I thought I knew and built something new, something authentic from the ruins. The woman who had walked into that dining room 3 years ago, who had shattered Vivian's triumphant declaration with my mere presence, had been fueled by rage, by humiliation, by the need to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The woman I had become was motivated by something deeper, not possession, not vengeance, but the hard-won understanding that true power lies not in what you own, but in who you are when everything is stripped away. I kept the postcard from Portugal in my desk drawer, alongside Richard's final letter and the forged identity documents I had never needed to use. Reminders of a time when my world had shattered and reformed, when deception had given way to truth, when I had discovered that sometimes you must disappear completely to learn who you truly are. And that knowledge, that self-knowledge, hard-won and precious, was the most valuable thing I had reclaimed from the ashes of my former life. More than any house, any possession, any social standing, it was the treasure no one could ever take from me again. This was my house now, my life now, my truth now. And I had earned every inch of it.